Hey, my name's Josh Pempashot. In celebration of the Great Awakening and UFO disclosure, I've put something together that's really amazing that I think you're really going to like. Are you interested in conspiracies, ancient history, mythology, UFOs and aliens, psychedelics and magic? Then get ready to have your mind blown, because I've got some information for you that's never been presented before. We're going to take a trip around the world and take a look at all sorts of secret symbolism. The first episode is called Cave Art, but I should warn you, this is unlike anything you've ever seen before in your life. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Well, that sounds like blasphemy.
He's gonna hurt the children.
I want that man arrested immediately. We can't do that, sir. This is America.
Sir, this is a Wendy's drive-thru.
Only thing you'll have to fear is fear itself.
Hard times. The only salvation is to be good. Be good.
It's estimated that the first cave art appeared approximately 35 to 40,000 years ago. This is also the same time estimated for the emergence of Cro-Magnon man. New studies are emerging, linking the changes in radiation of the Earth's atmosphere to potential species manifestations and growth cycles. This could explain why there are giant gaps in the evolutionary chain, especially as it relates to modern humans. This is in contradistinction to the stoned ape theory that suggests man evolved in some Darwinian process that began with primates consuming mushrooms, figuring out mental processes, and ending up with modern man. The point I'm making here is that since we know Neanderthal man was hunting and cooking for the last 100 to 300,000 years, maybe it wasn't until Cro-Magnon man came along that humans were able to process the mushroom experience in a way that progressed humanity forward culturally and spiritually. We know that psilocin, the active ingredient in mushrooms, is one molecule off from DMT, and every plant and animal species has DMT in them. Maybe Neanderthal man was not capable of utilizing the functions within DMT that allows processing of information in a way that we can process it today, like dreaming, for example. In the ancient world, the people viewed the earth as feminine because it gave birth to all the species of plants, animals, and mankind. But the worship of the almighty god or goddess was related to the general appreciation of nature, which was not seen as male or female, but rather hermaphroditic. The reason for this was because the ancient people believed in matrilineal units of society, which we now call tribes, and collectively they consumed the magic mushroom, which allowed them direct access and communication with nature, i.e. god or goddess. The mushroom is a hermaphroditic birth, which is an ideal state of perfection in nature requiring no partner to reproduce. The mushroom was considered the holy sacrament worldwide in all cultures and societies from the most ancient times up until the modern day. This is the essence of the biggest secret in existence, the biggest conspiracy on earth, a conspiracy perpetuated by the Catholic Church, Vatican, and the Jesuits, as well as hundreds of its controlled institutions. In fact, secret societies exist for the very purpose of concealing this one ultimate secret that you're going to learn all about. The mushroom can be found to exist behind every facet of the ancient world, so we'll start with cave art dating back 35 to 40,000 BC. Many of the rock glyphs you'll be seeing over the next few minutes have mushrooms as features of the head or body of some creature, entity, deity, etc. These are not entities or deities, though, as some people may have been led to believe. At the same time, they're not hallucinations of people on mushrooms drawing what they were seeing either. These are personifications of the mushroom itself as if it were a man or person. This is mankind creating the first mythology. Symbolism meant to bring the viewer's mind back to one central concept or understanding. This understanding is that mankind's wisdom and intellect as well as spiritual growth is all owed to the magic mushroom. In fact, the Greeks have one myth titled Metamorphosis, wherein two examples are cited of their belief that mankind emerged from the ground out of fungus. These are actual Greek creation myths. It seems to me the ancient people believed the mushroom started all life on Earth, but that's a philosophical topic and we'll leave it for another time. For now, just understand that the mushroom was the central focus and beginning of all myth and religion worldwide. The first image here is one of the oldest ones known. The mushroom has serpentine features. This is a first association of the serpent with the idea of wisdom. This becomes very common throughout the world. You will see them used interchangeably and sometimes together, which is even more revealing. Today, this is something everyone takes for granted without thinking about it. It's not that the serpent represents wisdom. That's for the uninitiated. For the initiated, the secret occult meaning is that the serpent represents the magic mushroom. That's part of the key to unlocking all of the ancient mysteries. Later in this presentation, you'll be given the other magic keys. The next images we see are examples where the heads are mushrooms. Because of a recent interest in ancient alien theories, many people have come to the conclusion that these are ancient astronauts or space alien visitations. That's complete nonsense. There's nothing in the ancient world that alludes to any of that. Only nature and all it encompasses, which includes the UFO as natural phenomena, which I'll get to in another presentation. The corona or halo you see around the head represents the gills or underside of the cap of the mushroom. This is where the spores drop from, and sometimes you can see them pictured on the ends of the lines, striations, leading up to the ridge of the cap. Later on, as the Patriarchy took over and images were displayed, it first became the symbol of enlightenment, then it became the blessed and holy halo. The evolution of the symbolism in mythology began to include the bird as well very early on. In fact, the two main goddesses of ancient Minoan Greece are the bird goddess and the serpent goddess, and the first mythologies we read about in Sumer in India involve battles between birds and serpents and eventually personified in later myth. Now I'm going to give you the second part of the key so you can unlock all the ancient mysteries by yourself. This is the most powerful secret knowledge that has ever been presented publicly. The bird goddess represents the cap of the mushroom, and the serpent goddess represents the stem. That's it. That's the most important information you'll need to understand the most serious secrets of the secret societies. This is the key to unlocking the mysteries and the occult symbolism behind much artwork. We'll be using these keys many times over the next presentations, and you'll begin to understand their importance. Equally important to keep in mind when viewing and deciphering these images for their secret symbolism is to watch for little details such as dots lining the ridge of the mushroom caps. Sometimes the dots reveal a lot about the truth of the image when you may not otherwise see a mushroom or the presence of spores at the end of the lines. These are common in cave art as well as Indian and Persian coins and frescoes. Sometimes in rock art, especially Native America, but also Saudi Arabia and Siberia, reveal what is often referred to as the thunderbird. This is simply the magic mushroom, but personified into the image of a bird. The thunder association comes from the fact that the ancient people believed thunder engendered the birth of the mushrooms. Therefore, thunder gods were a very important part of ancient mythology. Ultimately, we must realize that all mythology has four primal features on its exterior and one central core feature. The orbiting features are the four elements of earth, fire, air, and water. The central core element is the magic mushroom, which embodies all four primal elements and the fungal kingdom, being the highest up on the biological food chain. Here are a few more examples of mushroom rock art from around the world. In the following presentations, you'll see all sorts of variations of these themes on stelas, figurines, and ancient coins. All mythologies and religions worldwide can be traced back to these key concepts and symbols. Once you understand this, a whole new world of knowledge and understanding will open up before your very eyes. What's more, you'll start to see for yourself how the mushroom is the central core root of many conspiracy theories that may have previously eluded you as to their hidden meaning. There are many profiteers out there selling all sorts of misinformation and disinformation to the unsuspecting masses. While conspiracies like ancient aliens might seem interesting because it deals with things like the unknown, most of those theories are completely unreal. The information in these next presentations is not only believable, but completely down to earth and rational. Instead of relying on faith, I've relied on something that is almost lost and forgotten, the extremely important quality of mind called reason. It seems the prevailing consensus among Christians for decades, and now many conspiracy researchers as well, is that the ancient gods and goddesses were deities that were worshipped. Many also believe, mostly because of Eric von Daniken and Zecharia Sitchin, that they were extraterrestrials that mated with humans and created humanity, and every country has their own creation story that's the same, and they all talk about aliens. Well, that's complete bullshit, and I'm going to set the record straight once and for all. First of all the ancient gods and goddesses, whether from Sumer, Greater Mesopotamia, India, Egypt, Greece, or Rome, were all representations of nature. The primary elements were their disguise for the uninitiated. To the initiated, they were all symbolic representations of the magic mushroom. This is confirmed to me after I found images, all over 2,000 years old, of every known deity with either mushrooms growing out of their heads, or holding a mushroom in their hands, or mushrooms being artistically included in their overall design. We'll start with Sumer, where we see images of Anu, the sky god, depicted in mushroom dress, along with Ninhursag. These are some of the oldest representations, all of which come from scrolls. We often see date palms, which could be a double for the mushroom. Remember, everything is esoteric and occulted for the uninitiated. There's always a cover story for the general population who see and interpret the pictograms, but are not allowed to know the true hidden meaning. When we look at the images, it's one thing to interpret them based on what we see visually, but it's also important to compare the character depictions to their stories. In every case, we'll find the story actually talks about magic mushrooms, but it's also properly veiled. All of the main ancient myth stories from Sumer and Mesopotamia are covered in depth in ancient psychedelia. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest stories from Sumer. The tale of Marduk, called the Enuma Elish, is another epic from the same era. All in all, when the Library of Nineveh was excavated and texts were translated, it turned out many of the texts were the same retellings of similar ancient myths and stories. In other words, in all of the Middle East, the creation stories are mostly the same and expressed in their myth. Adapa and the Great Wind, Atrahasis, the story of the flood with the original Noah, etc. When you study these texts seriously, you realize, like Sir James G. Fraser and Joseph Campbell, that all myth is centered around nature and the elements, not off-planet species. When you learn to decode the mythology, you realize it all revolves around one thing, the magic mushroom. Gilgamesh is a demigod. He is seeking to acquire immortality. Immortality is a key feature around myth because the mushroom causes one's ego to undergo a form of death and rebirth, otherwise known as being reborn. Understanding that death is transitory and not permanent, the devotee or disciple becomes aware that they indeed live forever through the spirit. For now, they're only in the flesh. Marduk slays Tiamat, the great dragon of the deep, a leviathan. After slaying Tiamat, he takes out the heart and holds it up as an offering to Shamash. This is symbolic of the slaying and harvesting of the mushroom. This is also a recurring theme in mushroom mythology and symbolism, as you'll discover in an upcoming presentation on ritual sacrifice, beheadings, and cannibalism. So much talk about the Anunnaki these days and the Nephilim. These are completely unrelated to each other, and most are ignorant of this. The Anunnaki were also called the Seven Sages or the Apkallu. They were supposed to have taught mankind the arts and sciences, raised up mankind intellectually. Symbolism for the mushroom, that's all. They are seen picking pine cones from the tree of life. Why? Because Amanita muscaria only grow in symbiotic relationship with conifers, pine trees and oaks. The mushroom is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, another topic to be covered later. The basket they are holding is called a situla. It was a leather pouch originally carried by the shaman, which contained his collected urine. The Amanita muscaria metabolites stay active in the urine and can be recycled up to 5 times to reproduce the effects. Leaving Egypt aside for now, following the Sumerians and the Babylonians came the Hittites. Lots of Hittite imagery with mushrooms exist, compared to the scant imagery from Sumer. You have to keep in mind that the stories came first. Centuries or millennium later, they were depicted on stone scrolls or tablets, so sometimes the only images we have of, say, Gilgamesh or Assyrian Hittite several thousand years after the height of Sumer. Fortunately, though, we have the myth and stories to look at and compare. At this point, it's important to note we're dealing with 2 distinct kinds of mushrooms that get you high. One of them, the red-cap Amanita muscaria, and the other, the blue-stem psilocybin. Always keep these 2 important colors in mind, red and blue. Amanitas grow under pines and conifers only. Psilocybin grows in all kinds of climates and conditions worldwide, but they're especially known for growing from bull or cow dung. This is the reason the bull and cow were held sacred in the earliest Indian times. It's also where we get the term holy cow or holy shit. Lots of imagery depict bulls in scenes where secret mushroom symbolism occurs. You'll often see the occulted mushroom somewhere in the vicinity of the bull, especially in places like Gobekli Tepe in India, which will be covered in the next episode. Very early on, there was a shift from matrilineal to patriarchal, and this is fully evident by the time we arrive at Sumer. All the deities are warlike, conquering and masculine. This was not the case in Minoan Crete or in early India when the Rig Veda was written. The men had broken off from the clan tribes and formed cattle herds and went nomadic, leading to the Indo-Aryan invasions throughout the Middle East. This is very prominent in the imagery on the wall engravings and stelas. This split led to a creation of kingship in Sumer. This male-led patriarchal kingship then created slavery and used slavery to mine gold and other precious minerals from the ground. The whole reason the Sumerians invented writing was because they lost their ability to recall from memory vast quantities of material. The Druidic bards were said to have memorized the equivalent of 3 or 4 Bibles worth of material. This is how the Rig Veda was kept alive for thousands of years before being written down. On to the Nephilim, the giants, the fallen ones, the watchers. What were they? Well, there are 2 kinds of giants in the Bible, the fallen ones and the giants like David and Goliath, which I'll cover in a later chapter on fairy tales. The fallen ones, or the Nephilim, are the topic of our discussion here. In this entire presentation, I did my best to present everything based in fact, not speculation, but this I place more into the speculation folder for the time being. If the character of a worldwide mythos is the mushroom, then it makes perfect sense that the giants mentioned several times might just be the trees the Amanita muscaria grows in symbiosis with. I don't subscribe to the idea that the Devil's Towers are these trees, but now petrified. I don't know. I do know this. I've collected some interesting information for my ideas. The Anakites are associated with the Nephilim, who are also called the Rephaim. In Deuteronomy 2:19-20, we hear of the Ammonites living in the land of the Rephaim. This is where the sons of the Anakim dwelled. In Joshua 17:15, we learn that the land of the Rephaim was in the forests. Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear a place for yourself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." In Genesis 14:5, we read that the kings defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim. Asherahs were the trees that were worshipped, where the goddess temples were in the groves. This tells me the kings cut down all the giant trees with the axes. They were living among the sons of the Anakim. Where can we go up? Our brethren have made our hearts melt, saying, "The people are bigger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified to heaven. And besides, we saw the sons of the Anakim there." Deuteronomy 1:28. Slaying them was compared to removing the fruit from a tree which has been felled. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, though his height was like the height of cedars, and he was as strong as oaks. I even destroyed his fruit above and his root below. Amos 2:9. In Daniel 4, we read about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. It reads as follows: "In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, 'Cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots bound with iron and bronze remain in the ground, in the grass of the field.'" Now, the mountains like Devil's Tower could have been the inspiration for these kind of fables, but not the other way around. They would not be petrified if cut down just a few thousand years ago. But it seems very likely to me that the characters referred to as the Nephilim were the giants and the fallen ones, because the kings cut them all down with the axes. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. If you don't like it, debunk it then. We'll be moving on to India next, possibly the world's oldest civilization, due to its retention in some districts of the matrilineal clans which preceded the rise of Sumer. Sumer had no matrilineal clans. We might be mistaken to assume that the first people to write things down were the most civilized. This concludes the presentation titled You Can't Unsee It, Episode 2, The Anunnaki in Mesopotamia. For more information on this subject, visit ancientpsychedelia.com and check out the free online version of the book, Ancient Psychedelia, Alien Gods and Mushroom Goddesses. Thanks for watching. One last thing I should mention, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support me in my work, here are several ways you can do that. It does help tremendously, and I really appreciate it. Both India and Asia are probably the best locations to witness examples of secret mushroom symbolism because they attempted to hide it the least. We'll get to Asia in an upcoming presentation, but for now, India sets the stage for what comes next. India is known for their cobras and serpent imagery, and if you know how to translate the mythology, you'll start to see the mushroom everywhere. The Rig Veda is a collection of poems, or rather prayers, to the elementals to bring Soma for the worshippers to consume. Thanks to the work of Gordon Wasson, we know Soma was actually the magic mushroom. In Ancient Psychedelia, I went even further by extracting all the passages that applied to Soma directly and highlighting all the words from the same verses that reveal the mushroom is the main subject of the prayers. When tracing myth back to the beginning of everything, we find elements in the Rig Veda of the names and characteristics of these elemental deities that become present in later Persian and Mesopotamian texts from Sumer and Babylonia. One example is Mitra, associated with Varuna. Mitra later becomes Mithra in Persia. We have the 7 sages appearing as Brahma's sons in the pine forest and responsible for the castration of Shiva, who is later likened to Osiris in Egypt. All the elemental deities have characteristics of the mushroom associated with them in the verses of the Rig Veda. Briefly, some examples of this are as follows. O sovereign of the forest, thunder wielder, slew the dragon lying on the mountain. He found the treasure brought from heaven that lay concealed, heavenly food of the gods. Bull of earth, bull of heaven, lord of cattle, amid the plants he rises, king immortal, bedewed with holy oil, strengthened as it drank the rain. heals all sickness, Lord of Soma juice, colored red and blue, etc. As I stated in the two earlier presentations, the serpent represents wisdom because of its association with the magic mushroom, and the bull also represents the mushroom because magic mushrooms often grow from cow or bull dung. We see both of these animals representing deities used in the Rig Veda in the most simplest of terms with only basic characteristics. It's in the later texts that we find all sorts of fantastic attributes added that give more flavor to the myths. We can see only small changes in the Avesta, the primary text of the Zoroastrianism, which discuss the Haoma, the Persian version of Soma. We can see slightly more characteristics given to the deities. It's not until the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads that we see these deities become warlike heroes. This is the reason why I speculate in ancient psychedelia that India is a far older civilization than Sumer. All the Sumerian and Babylonian stories are just advances of the same elemental deities that started it in India that go back much further before the invention of writing. But now they are warlike and conquering. This is why I believe the Patriarchy started in India later on with the Brahmins. These were the first priesthoods who consumed the mushroom and gave only their urine to drink to their followers, never telling them the source of the inspiration, leading the people to believe the guru was a holy man who should be followed and obeyed without question. The metabolites can be recycled in the urine up to 5 times, as mentioned earlier. The priests later moved out of India and started to conquer the world by creating kingship in places like Sumer. All the most common Indian deities are pictured here, like Indra, who is a god of thunder, just like Zeus and Thor. Indra was also referred to as the Lord of Cattle in the verses in the Rig Veda. Shiva was identified with both Rudra and Agni. Rudra was a storm deity and Agni a fire deity. Shiva is attended by a bull named Nandi. Shiva is also known as the One-Footed, another common theme of mushroom mythology, which includes deities like the Monopedes and Achilles in Greece. This represents the mushroom which takes up water from its single leg. Garuda is an eagle deity who's often pictured fighting serpents, a common theme in ancient mythology. Vishnu is a sacrificial deity who hides himself 3 feet deep below the dirt among the roots of the plants. Ganesh was a deity representing intellect and wisdom, but didn't come until much later in the history of India when deities took on supernatural characteristics. Krishna, a blue deity representing psilocybin, is another character who appeared later in India in the Bhagavad Gita and sometimes pictured holding up Mount Govardhana. The Rig Veda also mentions a group of deities called Asvins. These are associated with the Maruts. It's my conclusion at this time the Maruts are wind elementals, which later became Mercury and Greece, the messengers. The Asvins are really interesting, however. They are described as luminous aerial vehicles, and they are prayed to bring the Soma. This will be covered in a later presentation on air elementals, sylphs, and UFOs. The oldest known coins in the world are from India around 600 BC. Early Greek coins started out around 400 BC. The oldest coins from India are called punchmark coins, and they contain images of bulls and mushrooms. Around 300 AD, during the Kushan Empire, they produced wonderful gold coins with Ashi, a goddess of fortune. She's also known as Lakshmi or Urdoksho, depending on the location of her adoration. She's holding the mushroom, her hands are sometimes made of mushrooms, and she was the original inspiration for our Statue of Liberty holding the Torch of Enlightenment. The mushroom represents liberty and revolution against authority. We also see images of just the mushroom along with spores around 1200 AD. Persian coins also depict strange mushroom headdresses and symbols of the fire altar for placing the sacraments before consumption. This may be where we get the idea of offering the first fruits of the harvest, which later become the firstborn son under the patriarchal Judeans. The Soma consumption was called the sacrifice in India. Since deity was thought to exist in the mushroom, it's possible the consumption meant the sacrifice of the deity, or it referred to the idea of the ego death and rebirth, which would indicate it was the disciple's old self being sacrificed. Regardless, this was the first idea of sacrifice in religion. The cow, which used to be holy, was now sacrificed in Brahma-led India and later Persia. All because the meaning of it was lost because the Hindu Brahmin priesthood hid the truth about the origin of the hide that came from their urine. The whole idea behind the origin of Mithra in Persia was the slaying of the bull. Egypt has some of the most fascinating examples of secret mushroom symbolism of any place in the world. It was the height of Middle Eastern society at one point. Egypt started out matrilineal and ended up patriarchal no later than the time of the first invasion around 3150 BC. The Hyksos moved in around 1650 BC, and this is when we really start to see mushroom symbolism appear. Out of all the artifacts and stelas that are in existence today, we really don't have much of anything from the earlier dynasties before this time period. The use of mushrooms in clan societies was egalitarian, and there were no secrets among clan members. The secrets arose when the male-led kingship societies withheld the knowledge of the mushroom from the people. The bull's horns were symbols of the early deities like Sin from Mesopotamia, as can be seen above the bull and also above Sin. The lie sold to the people later on by historians and archaeologists in modern times was that this is a moon god or deity. There were no moon gods in the ancient world, just like there were no solar deities or sun gods. They were all mushroom deities, originally in the tribal clan societies like the Minoan and early Mycenaeans from Greece, or the Celtic clans of Ireland and Scotland, which we will get into in upcoming presentations. When we see images of Khepri and hear the stories, what makes more sense, that a dung beetle is holding up the sun and rolls the sun across the sky, or the dung beetle is holding up dung, celebrating the magic mushroom? The trick they used on everyone in more modern times was saying that the ancient people associated the moon with the bull. This is total bullshit, again, meant to mislead. There is no evidence any ancient deity was ever associated with the sun or the moon until Egypt, that is. This is where the shift first began, and the priesthood created a strong distraction away from the mushroom by creating sun worship. The problem for them now is, we can put it all together, and we see lots of mushroom symbolism leaking through their sieve. Why is that? Because they hid the symbolism in artwork for the initiated priesthood. And now everyone who takes psychedelics is a potential priest able to decode their hidden messages. Planets and astrotheology were important as well in ancient times since Sumer and Babylon, but they didn't worship them in any way, and the planets held no association to any deities until the time of Rome, like Zeus associated with Jupiter, for example. The main symbols of Egypt, the Ankh, the Djed, and the Wasp scepter, are all symbols for life to the uninitiated. To the initiated, they're secretly symbols for the magic mushroom. They're always being depicted, held by Egyptian deities in interesting ways. The Ankh is either by itself, or part of a staff, or sometimes being fed to someone like food. The Djed pillar is combined with the Ankh or the Wasp scepter on many occasions, or it's a staff all by itself. In each of the examples, it's clear there's a connection between all three, and each of them is used in a way that conveys mushroom symbolism. What is the Eye of Horus we are also familiar with? Well, there's a sister symbol called the Wadjet that reveals more accurately the third eye symbolism is actually the magic mushroom, which opens up the third eye, or the ability to see things through the misty fabric of material reality. There is no process for opening up the third eye. It's an expression used to convey the idea of illumination that happens when someone takes psychedelic. Sometimes the symbolism is right in your face, but most of the time it's cleverly disguised and the headdresses are inside the bodies of the deities or characters in the artwork. The stories always support the mushroom narrative as well. For instance, we have Khnum at the potter's wheel creating the first human. Likewise, in Greece there are images of the creation of the first human that look very similar. Recall previous presentation where I pointed out Greek metamorphosis creation story where the first human spawned up from fungus in the soil. And images of Isis, who not only represented at times Upper and Lower Egypt, but she was known at times as being a bird goddess as well as a serpent goddess. And recall how I stated earlier, the biggest secret to unraveling the occultism of the mushroom was understanding the bird represents the cap of the mushroom and the serpent the stem. Sometimes Isis has a bird sitting on top of a mushroom on her head. Egypt was a place where medicine, magic, mushrooms, and myth all combined together to create symbolism and imagery that today most of humanity still struggles to unravel. But once you understand how important mushrooms were to the priesthood, and you put together that with the fact that in Egypt priests were also doctors, it all starts to make sense how the mushroom was the most primary ingredient for many magic medicines. But it wasn't only mushrooms. The Egyptians had likely isolated DMT as well, most definitely used cannabis and cocaine, and really just about any plant medicine worthy of its uses in healing. Now we'll take a look at some of the other well-known Egyptian deities and the hidden symbolism found in their heads and bodies. There's Sekhmet in the form of a lion. She's the consort of Ptah. She was a patron of healers and physicians, and her priests were skilled doctors. Horus was referred to as the Bull of Heaven. Horus holds the wand of the sacred acacia, which is a popular source of DMT, only one molecule off from psilocin, the active ingredient in mushrooms. Hathor was a cow goddess. She's often seen with the common Egyptian headdress, which features its own version of the hidden symbolism, similar to the goddess of Arena shown at the Sphinx Gate, which also closely resembles depictions of King Tut. Images exist of Tehute picking pine cones from the Tree of Life, similar to the Anunnaki. Tehute was the Egyptian equivalent of the Sumerian 7 sages in many ways. Osiris is the retelling of the story of Shiva, as mentioned earlier. At this point, he is a dying and resurrected vegetation god, slightly more removed from the mushroom in these Egyptian stories, but the imagery still reveals the older hidden truth. Osiris is a mushroom deity, along with all the rest of them, as we can clearly see. Sometimes his body appears dotted like an amanita mushroom. We have to wonder why the Egyptians always maintain this particular pose. Other figures of Egyptian mythology include Kneph, or Canubis, the first phoenix. Also, we see early images of Abraxas in pose similar to Kneph. There's so much secret symbolism in Egypt with magic mushrooms on the walls and stelas, it would seem as if possibly the entire creation of art itself was nothing more than priestly attempts to show off how well and beautifully they could disguise the mushroom from the slaves and lower classes. It really does appear this is how art got started in the ancient world, and the strangest thing is how it still seems to be the way the royal families and elites keep it from the populace in the current day and age. And finally, the later Ptolemaic period has lots of images of Serapis wearing a Modeus on his head. It's called a palmyrene priestly hat. What is it really? A mushroom, of course. Sometimes we see Aphrodite with one that doubles as a mushroom, and sometimes we see them on images of Kubaba or Cybele or Sibyl. In Metamorphosis by Ovid, once again, Lucius reveals his experience in the initiation of the Isis-Osiris-Serapis rites, where he describes how he, quote, penetrated to the boundaries of the earth, that he approached the borderland of death, and setting his foot on the threshold of Persephone, when he had been born through all of the 4 elements, he returned again. At midnight he beheld the sun gleaming with bright light, and came into the presence of the gods below and the gods above, and adored them face to face. In ancient Greece, the Minoans, who existed between 2700 and 1600 BC, used symbols of the mushroom in the form we commonly recognize as an axe, but they were never known to have fighting implements, and cutting trees down in the ancient world was a forbidden act. Axes were not used in Minoan Crete, yet we see some of the earliest mushroom symbolism here. The next people to occupy the area, the Mycenaeans, begin their era around 1450 BC. It's believed the Mycenaeans were Egyptians who settled in Crete. This is likely the time when Greece went from being tribal and matrilineal based to patriarchal. This meant lineage was passed down on the mother's side of the family, not some idea of female rulership. The society was egalitarian. Very little evidence exists of this changeover, but we see hints of it in Greek mythology, where it is said the Greeks cut down all the large trees in the Levant in order to make great sailing ships that travel around the world and were used to kill off the tribal clan families that still use the mushroom, like the Amazons. We also see hints of this in the ancient laws of Ireland, which put a person to death if he was caught cutting down a single tree. What kind of society would brag about their conquest of all female-led tribes? Did the Amazons wage war against the Greek men from halfway across the world? Of course not. The romanticized version of Greek society is a total fabrication and lie. Men were allowed to gather and do whatever they like. Women were restricted to go out at night. The original Greek sacrament was the magic mushroom, but later on it was turned into grapes in order to cover up the original meaning. Dionysus went from being a mushroom deity to being a grape and wine deity, and that's when we see the qualities of Bacchus become the god of wine and revelry. Greece is known for the mysteries of Orpheus. Orpheus was a later version of Mithra. He wears the same Phrygian cap of liberty originating from Phrygia, a kingdom in the west-central part of Anatolia. This is also the same character as Attis of Phrygia, who is castrated and who is a later representation of Osiris in Egypt and the earlier Shiva in India. The mysteries of Orpheus later became the Eleusinian mysteries, featuring Persephone and Demeter. For the uninitiated, wine was the holy sacrament, and wine consumption was common in Greek society. For the initiated, the mushroom was the true holy sacrament, and every year, new members of the public were allowed initiation. It doesn't seem the secret was so religiously guarded like it was in Egypt, where slavery was an integral part of society. Everything was about plants, medicine, and healing in ancient Greece. Daemons were thought to be afflictions of the mind from bad health or eating habits, and the bad daemons could be combated with good daemons from beneficial herbs and plants. All the gods and goddesses reflected these healing qualities, but primarily they're all elemental deities first and foremost. The story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and giving it to man is the idea of giving the food of the gods, the mushroom, to man for inspiration and wisdom so that he may be like the gods, similar to the story of Adam and Eve who ate the apple, which I'll get into in the next presentation. As mentioned in previous presentations, Prometheus is shown creating the first man, just like the earlier Khnum, with imagery of the potter's wheel, while Ovid's Metamorphosis tells the story of mankind being brought up from the fungus in the ground. Zeus is a thunder god like Indra, Baal, Teshub, Yahweh, and Thor. His weapon is the thunderbolt, called the Vajra in India. These were turned into arrows later on, as we can see in the shift over the years from ancient Greece to Roman coins. The eagle, as a bird, represents the mushroom cap and carries the thunderbolt, later changed to arrows. It's commonly said that Hecate was a triple moon goddess. That's ridiculous. The moon had no place in Greece. Hecate was a triple mushroom goddess, as can clearly be seen in the images of ancient artifacts. She was a giver of visions, and being triple-headed, she is like many two-headed deities like the Dioscuri or Castor and Pollux, two mushrooms growing up from the ground together, who are associated with the cornucopia or horn of plenty, the origin of which is the bull's horn. The mushroom was replaced with the fruit basket, but the origin of which was likely the goddess of plenty, covered in the previous presentation, or Doksho, Ashi, or Lakshmi. Mushrooms are occulted in the face of Hercules, who carries a bat made of oak, a pine, to hit the ground and cause thunder, which was believed by the ancient people to engender the growth of mushrooms. Glaucus is described by Ovid in Metamorphosis as a sea god turned immortal upon consuming a magical herb and was given the gift of prophecy. Glaucus fell in love with a sea nymph named Scylla, who closely resembles images of Abraxas, the Typhon, Vyala, Laksha, Shilanagig, Melusina, and even some images of Medusa. Perseus and Medusa are mushroom deities or characters as well. Aphrodite was a water deity and was born from the foam of the ocean in an oyster shell. She was a lady of the pearls. Pearls may be likened to the egg, perhaps the world egg. When you take the wind messenger deity Hermes and cross him with Aphrodite, you get the word hermaphrodite, which is a virgin birth, just like the mushroom. Hermes was a wind deity who carried spores across the fields for rebirth. This was most likely the original harvest festival because mushrooms can be harvested without learning to grow food first. Cultivation of crops came much later than mushroom foraging. Centaurs and Cyclops also come from Greek mythological lore. Both of these directly relate to the magic mushroom. Both have a single eye in the middle of their forehead. Chiron, who is the eldest and wisest centaur, was the son of Cronus and half-brother of Zeus. He taught Achilles and Asclepius the art of healing. He was a keeper of plant and shamanic wisdom. Chiron himself had been taught by Apollo and Artemis in the art of archery. His name is connected with the word surgeon or doctor. Sisyphus rolls a dung ball up a hill. Atlas holds up the dung ball above his head. All of this is mushroom symbolism, nothing more. One of the most interesting things we see in mushroom symbolism is the influence of the mushroom had on all sorts of tools, objects, and even clothing we take for granted today. For instance, where did the idea of a hat come from? Early images from coins tell us both the hat and helmet were related, and also the shape of coins and the ridging we see along the edges may have come from mushroom caps. How about the umbrella or parasol? Isn't that something we see in nature when frogs and insects take cover under the mushroom cap to keep away from the rain? Or what about axes? The axe became a weapon, but it's also used to cut down trees. In the earliest times, the axe represented God, and the letter X is one of its symbols. Trees were forbidden to be cut down in ancient times. Or anchors. Greek coins reveal anchors as important symbols, but is it really secret mushroom symbolism? Or hammers. We see the god Hephaestus forges the weapons of Achilles with a hammer. This is reminiscent of Hercules and his bat. Thunder is often associated with volcanoes, and Hephaestus in Rome is Vulcan, the volcano god or deity. What about the wheel? In Hindu and Buddhism, there is the wheel of life. Wheels are often depicted similar to mushrooms in ancient sculpture design. The mushroom cap does look like a wheel. Isn't it possible the entire idea of the wheel we owe to the mushroom as well? These were the original arrows in cave art, sometimes fashioned as mushrooms. Arrows, swords, and spears sometimes carry these associations on coinage and even on stelas on the ancient thunder deities like Teshub from the Hurrian pantheon. What about shields? Bactrian coins dating to early BC show the goddess Athena wielding a thunderbolt and a shield, and the shield looks very much like a mushroom. This is reminiscent of Indra from India with the thunderbolt, the Vajra in one hand and the mushroom button in the other. Were all these tools that humanity uses and takes for granted actually created based on the visual representation of the magic mushroom? It certainly looks like it to me. Early Rome was centered around the Etruscans, who were very similar to their neighbors in Greece. Much of what was covered in the presentation on Greece applies to the same time period in Rome. Etruscan art doesn't seem to make any more of a serious effort to occult the magic mushroom from the public view. Popular art includes parasols on stone stelas and artistic frescoes. The Roman headdress is straight out of the mushroom design school of fashion. We also see Roman versions of Greek deities expressed in even more patriarchal ways by promoting ideas of phallicism, which further occult the original meaning of the mushroom symbolism. Priapus was a vegetation deity similar to Dionysus and Bacchus, but now in Rome he had his own cult of followers and was celebrated for his constant erection. When we hear the term phallic worship in the ancient world, for the most part, other than the gay antics of the Greeks and Romans, it was really just a cover for the use of mushrooms. It's well known that Rome invaded Jerusalem in 70 AD, but the reason for this is not so well known. Rome raided Jerusalem for being a drug house. Jewish people were using cannabis, mushrooms, and opiates, and may have even perfected the use of rye grains to harvest LSD. Bethlehem was called the House of Bread for a reason. Coins from this era show that all of these plant medicines were in use, and many times they were featured with the sacred drinking cup, the cantharos. Rome had to deal with a number of different religious sects. They had groves dedicated to gods and goddesses, altars, and areas for the people to appreciate nature. The lands were filled with healing temples of all kinds. When Christianity first sprang forth, it was just like all these other nature religions, but we'll get to that in the next presentation. The caduceus was a long-known symbol for medicine that was originally held by Tehute and other Egyptian healing deities and represented the priest-doctor class. It was a priest-doctor staff later passed down to Hermes and Asclepius in Greece. There are a pair of wings on top representing the bird and a snake coil around it. Once again, bird and serpent symbolism combined together. Some of the earliest Greek versions actually reveal the mushroom. The caduceus secretly represents the magic mushroom, king of all kingdoms, and the primary healing medicine for all mankind. The priest staff evolved in all sorts of ways all over the area, where it appears on Roman coins in a variety of shapes and sizes, from 200 to 300 AD, as well as cushion Indian coins from the same time period. The staff was a symbol of not only medicine, but power as well. Some of the coin depictions around 400 to 450 AD are really odd. Later Byzantine-era coins show the staff becoming part of the Christian iconography. Here it became a crozier and shared qualities with the shepherd's staff, but still some of them reveal the hidden symbolism of the bird and serpent together. A recurring theme on Roman coins are angels offering halos with serpent symbolism attached. As previously discussed, the halo represents enlightenment through the use of mushrooms or psychedelics, the serpent representing the magic mushroom. Sometimes she's standing in front of an altar shaped like a mushroom, or sometimes just the altars as mushrooms are featured. Angels were messengers from God. The cherubim sit among the clouds. They have bows and arrows, like Cupid. On Roman coins, there are many depictions of angels with skirts that double as mushroom caps, and they all suspiciously sit on one leg, like Shiva and the monopeds we reviewed in an earlier presentation. The angel Nike is shown repeatedly in various positions, and sometimes her symbol is used interchangeably with the Roman military standard. This is sometimes depicted with either a serpent or slaves at the base. The Vatican itself is shaped like a mushroom, though some might argue it's the shape of a cross, but I would argue that derives from the mushroom. The popes and cardinals dress in the colors of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Sometimes the pope dresses like a mushroom in full bloom. There are more than 400 Mithra temples throughout Europe. The old temples of Roman gods and goddesses were destroyed by the superstitious Christians under the direction of the Catholic Church, which knew full well what they were doing, as you can see from these images. They were destroying the old world so they could create a new one. Churches were built up on the grounds of the sacked temples, and many church entrances continue to have mushroom designs built into them. Entrances on the inside of churches represent mushroom symbolism as well. Some of the designs include blue demons with mushroom symbolism, and some of the more interesting images exist in an area called the Villa of the Mysteries, which is probably a spin-off of the Eleusinian Mysteries in Greece. Some of the church art from 1000 AD onward depict mushrooms directly. All of the saints were named from mushroom stories. In fact, the Bible is the greatest psychedelic fairy tale ever told. Most of the stories are retellings of older mythological stories based on mushroom characters previously covered. And the church can't hide it anymore because of the internet. These images all come from inside older churches, and they never thought they would be exposed to the uninitiated who didn't first become priests within the church. At that time, nobody would have the social context to understand what the church was doing unless they were an insider such as a Jesuit priest. People around the world were not in touch like we are now. The Pope and the Jesuits are finally being exposed for the fraud they've committed for centuries, stealing personal spirituality and replacing it with a paid admission to heaven. Remember who lied to you and who told you the truth. There's lots of people in this world that still believe the story of Adam and Eve as if it was literal. Only the most ignorant and foolish people take the stories in the Bible literally. That's like reading Little Red Riding Hood and believing that wolves sometimes dress up as our grandparents and hide in bed waiting for us at night, or Bugs Bunny defeated Daffy Duck in the Great Battle sometime around AD 1976. Children might believe these things, but adults should know better, yet our desires to be comfortable lead us into warm and cozy dungeons of the mind. The tree of life is a representation of the pine tree, which Amanita muscaria mushroom grows in symbiosis with. The base of conifers are the only place you'll find them growing. The fruit of the tree of knowledge is the mushroom. That's the hidden metaphor in symbolism. Both the serpent and the apple secretly represent the magic mushroom. The stories of birds and serpents start in Sumer. The first story of the Tree of Life comes from the story of Gilgamesh, when the sky god An had carried off the heavens and the air god Enlil had carried off the earth. When the queen of the great below, Erishkigal, was given the underworld for her domain, Enki, the god of wisdom, set sail for the underworld. At that time, a single tree, the Hulupu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The tree was nurtured by the waters of the Euphrates. The whirling south wind arose, pulling at its roots and ripping at its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. Inanna cared for the tree with her hand. She settled the earth around the tree with her foot. The years passed, 5 years, and then 10 years. The tree grew thick, but its bark did not split. Then the serpent, who could not be charmed, made its nest in the roots of the Hulupu tree. The Anzu bird set its young in the branches of the tree, and the dark maid Lilith built her home in its trunk. At this point, Gilgamesh responds to Inanna's call for help. He entered Inanna's holy garden. Gilgamesh struck the serpent, who could not be charmed. The Anzu bird flew with its young to the mountains, and Lilith smashed her home and fled to the wild, uninhabited places." End quote. In the Adapa myth, Inanna eats from the cedar pine tree to acquire knowledge of how to have sex with her bridegroom Dumuzi of Uruk, who later becomes Dionysus in Greece. The fruit of the mess tree at Eridu was called the food of the gods. Inanna was the pre-biblical prototype of Eve. The whole story is nothing more than a fairy tale about opening your mind's eye for the first time and seeing yourself in the world for what it truly is. Being naked is a metaphor for being vulnerable and exposed to light. The enlightened individual can see things now for what they truly are without the moral or social clothing. The story of Jesus Christ arose from the desire of a sect of people in Rome to create a figurehead that represented the mushroom in allegory only. It was common for sages and seers who used mind-altering drugs like the mushroom to write down their ideas in the forms of poetry that expressed the wonders of the sacrament. It wasn't until centuries later that the church incorporated their own twist on things by editing the books of the drug poetry they liked and left behind the ones that didn't suit them. Jesus started out like all the other dying and resurrected gods before him, Tammuz, Osiris, and Shiva. Jesus Christ was originally an amalgamation of 3 deities: Dionysus, a vegetation god who dies and is reborn each year with the seasons, a solar deity associated with Mithra from Persia, and the healer priest doctor Asclepius, who was taught by Chiron the centaur and held the caduceus. This is obvious because Jesus has all 3 of these qualities in his character and persona. Rome took advantage of this nature religion and used it for their selfish purposes of control and manipulation. Most people could not read and had no access to biblical literature. They only knew what they were told. This is what led to the witch trials in the Dark Ages. We must ask ourselves this question. If Jesus wasn't really the magic mushroom, then why would the church have at least 100 paintings inside churches and images of Jesus in scenes depicted with mushrooms, or even going so far as to have him as the Lord of Lords, King of Kings of the fungal kingdom? It seems that if there is a way to depict Jesus as a mushroom, it was already invented by the Catholic Church. The whole reason the church had to go on missions killing people all around the world and forcing the idea of Jesus Christ down their throat at knife point was because the people already had a religion of the mushroom without all the phony baloney of Jesus. The Catholic Church is all about conquest and world domination through mind control, and Jesus Christ is their ultimate weapon. People believe in Jesus without knowing anything about him. The history books from that period leave him out entirely because he was a fictional character that didn't exist until Rome decided he did. In order to understand Jesus, we have to understand manna from heaven, the food of the Israelites in the desert. In Isaiah, we read about the bread of adversary and the water of affliction. Although the Lord gives you the bread of adversary and the water of affliction, your teachers will be hidden no more. With your own eyes you will see them. In Exodus, we read about the Lord providing the bread of heaven to the Israelites in the desert. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are out to go out each day and gather enough for the day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. Exodus 16:4. Then we read about dew and the flakes left on the ground in the morning. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. Next, Moses warned them not to keep any of it until morning, and to use it all in the evening. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. In his work, On the Cherubim, Philo, who lived from 20 BC to 50 AD, discusses the mysteries and the importance of not revealing them to the profane. But that we may describe the conception and the parturition of virtues, let the superstitious either stop their ears or else let them depart, for we are about to teach those initiated persons, those who are worthy of knowledge of the most sacred mysteries, the whole nature of such divine and secret ordinances. Philo also speaks of manna as the food of wisdom. Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up unto the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your ancestors ate manna and died, but whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. This is the story of immortality once again. The mushroom and the psychedelic experience cause the initiate to experience a form of death which allows them to know that their spirit truly lives forever. The whole idea that you would eat the flesh of Jesus and drink his blood, and this is represented by the Eucharist in the Christian religion, is literally the sacrifice of eating the magic mushroom. It's the same as what occurred in the Rig Veda and the Soma sacrifice. The fact that Christians glorify the sacrifice of Jesus and the head of John the Baptist should really tell you something. The church is telling you the truth about child and human sacrifice, and it's all about the virgin birth of the mushroom, the Virgin Mary, and the harvesting or beheading of the mushroom. This is a recurring theme in medieval church art, and sometimes it's really revealing what the true intentions of the allegories or metaphors. Remember, we wouldn't be seeing images like this if there was no connection here. I can't make all this stuff up by myself. Another story besides the crucifixion of Jesus and the beheading of John the Baptist and serving of his head on a platter is the story of Judith beheading Holofernes, which is told in the book of Judith. There's several examples of secret mushroom symbolism in church depictions of this story as well. When the Greeks and Romans traveled the world conquering mushroom-consuming tribal clans, the stories they always sold back home to the people were that the uncivilized barbarians sacrificed their children to the gods like Moloch and Baal. They eat their children too. This was the justification for slaughtering the native people all over the world. This started with the Greeks decimated the Amazons, the Romans decimating the Druids, and then the Catholic Spaniards decimating the Aztecs and the Mayans. In every example, the native people were known to consume the magic mushroom as a fact, and we have no real evidence that they ever sacrificed people. But this is exactly the lie the Catholic Church sold to the world, while the whole time they knew exactly what they were doing, that sacrifice was secret mushroom consumption symbolism. The Virgin Mary is based on the mushroom's virgin birth. A hermaphroditic species is said to be born from a virgin. That's what virgin birth is. Sacrificing virgins means eating mushrooms. There's nothing real when it comes to virgin sacrifice. It's mushroom mythology. The church lied once again. What else did they lie about? How about the devil? Is there really a devil if there's no Jesus? The devil was invented in Zoroastrianism in Persia in the text called the Zendavesta. The forces of good were pitted against the forces of darkness. Over time, Ahura Mazda represented qualities including good mind, righteous order, divine plenty, devotion, perfect sovereignty, and wholeness, were pitted against Angra Mainyu, who represented evil mind, false appearance, cowardice, hypocrisy, misery, and extinction. There was no devil before this time period of 2200 to 2000 BC. The books of the Old Testament were compiled approximately 500 years later. So what was the devil then? It was the negative side of the human psyche that was pitted in mortal combat with the goodness inside oneself. The devil only exists in the mind. The church knows this but scares the shit out of people with superstition and ignorance in order to control them and make them obey the church. Moses had bull horns, and so does the devil. They are bull horns because the mushroom grows up from bull dung. The idea of hell comes from the location of the mushroom's birth, underground, in the soil, where it's dark and dreary. Religion is nothing more than a bunch of bullshit. The devil's horns represent the mushroom, and this can be proven when one is shown all the imagery of the devil that exists in medieval church manuscripts. If the church really took Jesus or the devil seriously, would they ever allow these kinds of images to exist, which reveal the secret symbolism of the magic mushroom? Would entrances to the underworld be flanked with hidden mushrooms if hell were a real place feared by church ministers? Basically, the devil is the demons or mental illnesses accumulated from improper thinking about oneself and the world around them, mismanagement of thoughts and emotions that lead to mental breakdowns and aberrant behavior, unbalanced mental images and ideas that result from not dealing with the shadow self. This is called by many practitioners shadow work, or taking full responsibilities, which means no longer blaming others for the problems in your life. The church wants to lay blame on every other person or entity, God or the devil, outside yourself, so you never have to confront your own truths. It's ghosts or demons behind everything, or interdimensional entities, or whatever they come up with next. That's the disempowering trick to rob you of your soul and mental capacity to think critically and deal with life constructively. What I'm talking about is self-empowerment and taking your power back. This concludes the presentation titled You Can't Unsee It, Episode 7, Jesus Christ, the Virgin, the Devil, and Hades. For more information on the subject, visit ancientpsychedelia.com and check out the free online version of the book, Ancient Psychedelia, Alien Gods and Mushroom Goddesses. Thanks for watching. One last thing I should mention, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support me in my work, here are several ways you can do that. It does help tremendously, and I really appreciate it. The Middle Ages had some of the strangest artwork by far. There's several alchemy-related pieces of art that have hidden mushroom symbolism, images of the original creation theme with some basic mushroom occulting techniques. It seems that some of the artists had access to some really good drugs at the time. After all, they killed everyone else who had them and confiscated the medicines for themselves, right? That's what they did to the Knights Templars, the Albigensians, and the Cathars during the early 14th century, which forced those families to go underground and create secret societies years later like the Rosicrucians. The Middle Ages, or the medieval period, was filled with glamorous fairy tales and marvelous creatures like the serpent fairy Melusine from the 14th century. It's a story that revolves around a common fairy tale theme of a king's greatest fears of not having a living male heir to pass the kingship down to. Many of these fairy tales deal with changelings, which are children who are expected but never born, a common horror movie and alien impregnation mythology theme. The royal family at the time were telling people that the royals were the result of fairy offspring, and the story was told through the tale of Melusine. Images of Melusine depict her with a serpent's tail. Some of her images show that she has a direct connection with Scylla, Abraxas, Viela Laksha, and Sheila Nagig. Around the same time, we get mythologies like King Arthur and the Holy Grail. Percival went ahead and bravely captured the King's Grail cup after slaying the Red Knight. There were 3 different Grail authors at the time, and only one of them introduced the idea of the Grail cup holding the blood of fictional Jesus. What would this blood in the cup be? The same Soma juice that was discussed in the Rig Veda and pressed through a filter, the filter of which is shown in the shape of a mushroom next to a bull in early Hittite seals. When the Amanita muscaria mushroom is in its eagle phase, it then folds upward to create a cup, which becomes the phoenix phase before it dies and is reborn. This cup holds one form of the water of life in it. The rain mixing with pigments of the mushroom turn the water blood red, and this by itself is a form of the sacrament. The serpent, which represents the mushroom, is used in Christian iconography to occult the true meaning of the mushroom. This was the quest of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. It is also the core of the Hermetic works of spiritual alchemy, not chemistry, but true alchemy. Of course, Merlin the magician plays a role in all this. He was a soothsayer or seer for King Arthur. Elements of his role reveal mushroom symbolism both in the story and iconography. Vortigern was the king of the Britons and counseled by magicians to seek out Merlin the magician because Merlin was an incubi birth, a fatherless child. At one point, Merlin was about to be killed, and he told the king of a prophecy of 2 dragons. Sure enough, after excavating a pond where Merlin's blood was to be shed, 2 dragons emerged and started fighting with each other. One was red and the other was white. This became the cross of St. George and later the flag of England. This was taken directly from the Knights Templars. The red cross represents the magic mushroom. All sorts of magical creatures were also born out of the medieval period, like unicorns and dragons. Many people today believe that both of these were creatures or animals that once lived, especially since there are so many poetic recollections of them. In fact, the churches had books called bestiaries that were filled with all these marvelous creatures, like, for instance, the Romance of Alexander is a really interesting one. We can see all sorts of fantastic and marvelous artwork of strange animals and magical creatures. How about a horse that's given a throne? There's a whole cookbook on how to cook your unicorn. There was a vegetable lamb of Tartary. How odd. All of these creatures are just manifestations of the mushroom, taking over the creative mind of religious people who knew how to create mythology. St. George Slays the Dragon is probably the most popular myth fairy tale story from the Middle Ages. Lots of different artwork pieces display the secret mushroom symbolism. Even the physical architecture in Europe has mushrooms at the base. For all those who still believe dragons were real, I have a big disappointment for you. This might be a heartbreaker, but I stated many times in previous presentations that the biggest part of the key to unlocking the ancient mysteries was understanding that the bird represents the cap of the mushroom and the serpent represents the stem. Well, that's exactly what a dragon is. It's a bird serpent. Duh. The story of St. George slaying the dragon, as well as St. Margaret, both have secret mushroom symbolism in them. This is why we see dragons on royal crests, not because their families descended from dragon lords. The truth is, when you mix the color red from the Amanita muscaria and the color blue from psilocybin, you get the royal color purple. That's why purple is the color of royalty. The royal families, along with the Catholic Church, run the world not because they are specially descended from fairies or lizard people, but because they carry the secrets of the magic mushroom in their families all the way down the line back to the Roman and post-Roman era. They rule because they know these things and you don't, or at least you didn't up until now. When we think of the Dark Ages, the most common event that comes to mind were the witch trials. It's no small coincidence that the witch trials happened at a time when Europe was plunged into darkness because the church persecuted anyone who was known to use sacred herbs and plants for medicine, and most especially anyone who used the magic mushroom. When Joan of Arc was questioned during the Inquisition, she was asked what information she knew about the fairies. Fairies are code at the time for magic mushrooms. In the last presentation, the idea was put forth that virgin and human sacrifice were both covers for mushroom consumption. Allegories or metaphors. Didn't we learn as kids that witches boil children in their cauldrons to make soup so they can eat them? Isn't that the whole point of the story of Hansel and Gretel, the fairy tale filled with mushroom symbolism? How many people were killed by the Catholic Church over this persecution of plants, medicine men and women, ultimately seers, visionaries, and shaman? We don't know the exact figure, but it's estimated in the millions over a century or so. So then, why did the Catholic Church and their Christian followers commit these murderous acts? Well, the Church had a number of complaints about women and the men who helped them carry out these terrible, horrible practices like divining the future or herbal birth control or inducing abortions if necessary, copulating with devils, casting spells. But one thing we learned from the church that I find most interesting is that some women were capable of making a man's member disappear completely. Do you believe witches can do that? Well, if you believe it, it just might be true. My whole life I've been a student of the occult mysteries. I got started at 10 when I decided to test my psychic skills. It was one of the freakiest things that ever happened to me in my life, and I've been through some major weirdness, let me tell you. A year later, I was playing with Ouija boards and communicating with the dead, or so I believed at the time. My next-door neighbor was my best friend, and his family was from New Orleans, good southern black folks. My friend's mom used to tell us that she knew about voodoo, and this was all in our minds. This was when I was explaining to her that my ghost friend was throwing shit around the house on my request, and my best friend, her son, was there witnessing it with me and my mom. It's an understatement to say I've seen weird shit. It's the story of my life. I can say with very strong confidence that many people in this world are viewing things incorrectly when it comes to black magic and summoning demons. We've seen and learned how the ancient people never worshipped deities that they would ever feel compelled to sacrifice to begin with. They were not harsh, judgmental, and punishing patriarchal kings disguised as gods, remember? The scenes of sacrifice were scenes of mushroom consumption. Hollywood knows this. Just start to pay more attention and you'll see what I mean. There was never talk of these things in the ancient times, only as superstition, not any kind of art form. The grimoires and rituals are part of a show, the stage props. The real dark magic does not go on in black mass ceremonies. It goes on through a process specially developed by Hollywood, through a psyop. Children are kidnapped and tortured and raped for fun, then disposed of. I'm sure they are not sacrificed to any deities. The people who portray themselves as Satanists that are educated know it's all a show. Kids that see these things don't know the difference from a kid's magic show. They are young and naive and report back what they believe they've been through or witnessed. Children are suffering in this world and being subjected to horrible shit, but it doesn't make it any better that the people believe it's due to the influence of the bugs from planet Klendathu. We cannot communicate with deities from beyond this world. We can believe we can, and whatever we believe becomes true to a lesser or greater degree. True magicians study nature and learn from nature how energy flows. Black magic is all about using one key element, deception. Hollywood deceives you into believing black magic is conducted over pentagrams at satanic masses. Black magic is what Hollywood does, and they're the best at it by far. Those are the dark arts. Study magic and you'll see. If anyone in this world is sacrificing kids to some deity, they do it not because they're communicating with anyone, but because they're mentally disabled to begin with. The superstitious beliefs are detracting from getting the kidnapped and trafficked children the help they really need. Don't forget, it was the church who took in all the orphan children from all the male and female herbalists they murdered and made all those children slaves to the clergy with no other option. The darkest, most evil organization in the world, along with the Jesuits, along with the British royal family, Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha, and Hollywood. The Zionist Jews play a role, but it's minor compared to the role played by the Vatican and British intelligence for the crown. In the last presentation, we reviewed the importance of the bird and serpent symbolism, combining in bird serpents to make dragons, and this being a central key in deciphering the secret symbolism of the magic mushroom in the ancient world. Quetzalcoatl is a great representation of that serpent god deity. The stories of creation based around this deity are very similar to the stories of creation elsewhere. They have nothing to do with aliens. The Popol Vuh is nature-based, like all other creation stories. Let's go through part of it really quick. Whatever might be is simply not there. Only murmurs, ripples in the dark, in the night. Only the maker, modeler alone, sovereign plumed serpent. The bearer, begetters are in the water, a glittering light. They are great knowers, great thinkers in their very being. And then came his word. He came here to the sovereign plumed serpent, here in the blackness, in the early dawn. Then it was clear. Then they reached a chord in the light, and then humanity was clear. When they conceived the growth, the generation of trees, of bushes, and the growth of life of humankind in the blackness, in the early dawn. All because of the heart of sky named Hurricane. Thunderbolt Hurricane comes first. The second is newborn Thunderbolt. The third is raw Thunderbolt. It is well that there be your mannequins, wood carvings, talking, speaking there on the face of the earth. So be it, they replied. The moment they spoke, it was done. The mannequins, wood carvings, human in looks and human in speech. This was the peopling of the face of the earth. They came into being. They multiplied. They had daughters. They had sons. These mannequins, wood carvings. Notice it doesn't say anything about aliens mating with humans, not even remotely. Hurricane is the Mayan deity of wind, storm, and fire, and one of the chief deities who restored humanity to the earth after the Great Deluge. One of his epithets is the heart of the sky. His name means one-legged, just like Shiva and just like the angels covered in the presentation on Rome, and just like the monopetes from both Greek and 16th century lore. Chicamostoc is the name for the mythical origin place of the Aztec and the other Nahuatl-speaking people of the central Mexico region. It was said to contain 7 caves. It looks like a tree but doubles as a mushroom and also resembles the world tree of the Yggdrasil Norse mythology. The word for America, Amaruca, means the land of the plumed serpent. Why? Because mushrooms grew all over the place. World voyagers such as Marco Polo talked about this in their diaries, except they referred to them as dragons. Apparently, some of the sailors and adventurers had a hobby of collecting prize dragons to compare with each other from their voyages abroad. Diego Duran, a Dominican friar, became famous for publishing accounts in his book, The Histories of the Indies of New Spain. In 1562, Friar Diego de Landa was convinced the native people were back to practicing their old sacrificial rites of consuming the mushroom instead of praying to Jesus for salvation, so he tortured the heretics and burned their entire library and collection of sacred texts and documents, their Maya hieroglyphic books. By the middle of the 16th century, Friar Bernardino de Sahugan worked closely with Central American nobles and recompiled histories of their rituals, language, and culture. In 1760, the priesthood incorporated questions into a religious manual that equated eating peyote with cannibalism. This is where we get the ideas of Aztecs and Mayans doing unspeakable things. This is where we get the ideas of human sacrifice from. Did you know there's not a single book that exists that cites actual evidence of ritual sacrifice of children or humans among native people anywhere in the world? Every citation leads the researcher to a dead end and eventually to mushroom consumption within that tribe or clan as the focus of their religious and spiritual worship. Once a person realizes that all the deities were nature deities and that even to the ancient people they represented the four elements and there were no overpowering human-like god personas out there in the void judging and watching over us, it seems really silly to imagine that the ancient people thought they needed to sacrifice their children or anyone in the tribe to these deities of nature. That's all religious bullshit that was used to exterminate the people and rid the world of the knowledge of the mushroom consumption among native people. One of the things that made it easier for the Vatican priesthood to say that there was human sacrifice going on was the fact that Mexican art already portrayed this as a part of the culture. Headhunters, people who go out and harvest the mushrooms for the tribe. They were personifying all of this as part of their own mythology, no different than the Christians did. One image shows a dragon deity harvesting a head with a mushroom axe, and another is a mushroom deity red with white spots, and he's harvesting a head. It's all symbolism, but the true initiate understands the hidden meaning. The Mexican people also called the mushrooms affectionately the little children, so eating the little children, the flesh of the gods, was not really inconceivable. And lastly, we might do well to compare the Greek mythology of Prometheus, whose punishment for stealing fire from the gods to give to mankind, i.e. the mushroom, was being tied to a stone and having a vulture come and peck out his heart night after night. What's that all about? A scene from the Madrid Codex depicts the Lord of the Underworld offering up a mushroom. Another shows the devil dancing on top of a mushroom. If you know how to read symbols and understand their meaning, everything in ancient history makes a lot more sense. The Vatican and Jesuit-led Spaniards killed off entire nations of people in the areas. They killed off anyone who didn't convert to Christianity. Isn't that a great way to recruit people for your new globalist one-world religion? Join us or we'll kill you and your family? The most famous object considered a ceremonial or burial object, but also called a Tumi knife or axe to cover up the origins, is obviously a mushroom. This Tumi symbol is on practically every artifact from South America, and Peruvian idols are said to be warriors with shield and spears. But a closer look and an understanding of the culture reveals the magic mushroom, and these are not warriors at all, but rather shaman characters. Why did they lie to us and tell us they are warriors? Because they want us to believe they were savages before Christ came along. That's why, with no spirituality or positive purpose to offer the world. Tupac Amaru was the last tribal leader of the Incas. Tupac means royal, and Amaru means serpent. Tupac was murdered by the Spanish conquistadors in Peru in 1572 in a months-long pursuit following the Spanish-Roman conquest of the civilization. In Central America, the Jain Mayan figurines are especially interesting and artistic to say the least. Many of the artists didn't go through much trouble to hide the symbolism. Mushrooms appear on their ears, on the headdress, and even as a shield. But it's not a shield, it's a giant mushroom cap. This is likely where we get the original idea for earrings as well. Mushroom decorations on the body. What's strange to notice is the earring design is eerily similar to Indian, Jain, Buddhist earring mushroom designs. It seems Nepal and America were connected in ways. The shaman's hat during the Jain period also looks identical to the Kushan-era Indian shaman's hat. Now we know where the idea of the wizard and witch's hat comes from as well. Is this a spaceman flying a spaceship, or is it really a man with the mushroom above him? Have a look for yourself and draw your own conclusions. It looks like a man with the mushroom above him, and he doesn't look like he's operating it. The image in front of his nose indicates a snuff pipe for cajoba beans, which would be like DMT. In northern Mexico, lots of figurines exist of shaman holding mushrooms, and the images don't leave much to the imagination, where the only thing the historians can say, which they do indeed, is that they're carrying umbrellas. Because, you know, umbrellas were such an important religious symbol, right? The most interesting to me by far are the ones where the bird serpent dragon deity is holding out mushrooms, as if to say, I've got something very special for you, It's a gift from the gods. Here, have some. They're fun, and good for eating, too. The veil on the headdress is the mushroom cap. There are dots or bumps like scabs on the head as well. There are caps on the arms and legs. This is classic mushroom symbolism. Now, the fear-mongering religious and superstitious Christians will tell you these are reptilian gods. Well, that's a topic for the last presentation, so stay tuned. Everyone knows how popular dragons are in Asia. The dragon has a very special place in the hearts of the Asian people. The bird and serpent goddess combination that creates the bird-serpent dragon is expressed in the early Han Dynasty figures. Notice the ridges around the head of the dragons, representing mushroom caps. It's almost always present. The kingdom of Bhutan exists in the eastern Himalayas. The history tells the story of King Lingpa, who, while out searching for mushrooms one morning, fell asleep and had a vision of a monk who gave him a scroll and told him to look well and get me some food. When Pema Lingpa was done preparing the food, he went outside and the monk had disappeared. He looked at the scroll and it read, "At the foot of the valley he would find his sought-after wealth." After this event, a number of scrolls were presented to him during a series of visions. Coincidentally, the head of the state is the king of Bhutan, known as the Dragon King. The people there are known as the Dragon People, and Bhutan itself is known as the land of the Thunder Dragon. Bhutan officially adopted Buddhism in the 7th century AD. The oldest artifacts from Asia appear to be from around 1000 BC from the Jomon era, but they're kind of rare. Most artifacts and figurines start from the Han Dynasty 200 BC to 200 AD. This coincides with the era of the people of Colima, Mexico, and Kushan Empire in India, as well as the beginning of the Roman Empire. The figurines from the Han Dynasty also use the arms to create the mushroom caps similar to the Egyptian mushroom pose. There's wall art that depicts the Guardian of Midnight holding two mushrooms that double as staffs. These are the same priest-doctor staffs we see in Egypt, the caduceus in Greece, the Kushan priest-doctors on coins from the same era, and the crosier in Rome. This symbol becomes the Ru-Yi scepter known throughout Asia in the 18th century. Buddhism didn't really take off until the 7th century, the same time as the beginning of Islam and the era of Muhammad. Both the Buddha and Muhammad are imaginary, fictional characters that never existed. There were never any figureheads of religion until the religious cults started in America, like the Mormon Church, the Jehovah's Witnesses, Jim Jones, and Heaven's Gate. Oh boy, is that last one a doozy. The UFO cults. The story of the Buddha is one that revolves around mushrooms, and if anyone in the religion can't see this, they need to get a pair of glasses or maybe corrective eye surgery. The mushroom dominates all the Buddhist iconography. The Buddha was supposed to have obtained his enlightenment under a Bodhi tree around 500 BC. Based on all the previous mushroom history of the world, I would say he was a little bit late to the party. Every depiction of the Bodhi tree is obviously a mushroom. The designers of this era made little to no effort to disguise this for the uninitiated like we see in other occultings of the mushroom, such as the wheel, the hat, the shield, or the spear. The era of Gandhara, around 1000 AD, saw a major metropolitan district created between Asia and India in the area of what is now Pakistan. This is where the majority of our images and artifacts come from. This was a center of higher learning and spirituality, similar to Egypt 2000 years prior. There's a wheel of the law, which appears all over the place. This is obviously a mushroom cap. It's depicted in several ways, but always reveals mushroom symbolism. Sometimes it's part of a stupa, which can also appear in different variations as well. Then we have the stupa by itself, which is just a stack of mushrooms on top of each other. Entire buildings are built this way, even in Japantown, San Francisco. Another object we see everywhere in Buddhism is the parasol or umbrella. Similar to what we saw in Mexico, little effort is really made to trick the uninitiated. If you think about it, though, they don't really need to. Just think about how many people, maybe yourself included, went all this time until now without seeing this as a mushroom. A lot of it takes place on unconscious levels. We take everything for granted and walk around asleep most of the time. It's time to wake up from that slumber if you're not already awake. Atlantis and Lemuria are popular in modern times. Plato first talked about it, but it was all theory on the perfect society, not a recounting of an actual location that existed. The myth of a real Atlantis appears to have started with Madame Helena Blavatsky, as far as I can tell. She founded the Theosophical Society in 1875, and in 1888 she published The Secret Doctrine, which makes mention of Atlantis. However, Jules Verne wrote about it as early as 1871 in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, though I suspect he borrowed the inspiration from this from Blavatsky. Ignatius Donnelly first published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World in 1882, right in between the time Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society and the time she published The Secret Doctrine. Blavatsky had traveled to Tibet to learn all of this, supposedly. That's the key here. She must have been such an important person because she was supposedly shown secret ancient documents by a group of monks that revealed these things to her. In a book by Tim Moroney, The Book of Dizyan, the truth is revealed that Blavatsky was a liar, a charlatan, and a complete fraud. What she held was knowledge she acquired in her life, possibly through Rosicrucian Freemason friends or family. Her works were later praised by Manly P. Hall, and both of them were heavily promoted by Jordan Maxwell, a friend and early mentor of mine. In Tibet, it is known there are two sacred mountains, Mount Kailash and Mount Himalaya. Mount Kailash is also called by the Buddhists Mount Meru, and was said to be the sacred mountain of Shiva and his sons. I wouldn't be surprised if mushrooms grew at the base during certain times of the year. It's sacred to the people of four religions, Bon, Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain. Elevation is 21,000 feet. I suspect Blavatsky used this information and substituted Mount Meru for Lemuria and Mount Himalaya for Atlantis, and this is actually where she derived her Atlantis mythology. People chasing the source of Atlantis are wasting their time. It's all mythology, and that's what some of the modern secret societies are involved with, creating and promoting new mythologies. The CIA specializes in this nowadays, but it seems to have started in the late 1800s with the Theosophists, who it appears spawned off early science fiction by influencing the likes of H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Arthur C. Clarke, and Isaac Asimov. This will be covered more in the last episode. I never learned much from Blavatsky, I think mostly because I always developed my own personal spirituality instead of depending on sources outside myself for that, but I have tremendous respect for the work of Manly P. Hall, who was not a real Mason but an honorary one. Most people don't know that. He compiled all the esoteric works from all the ages and made them understandable and available, but he was not a Mason. And I appreciate the contributions Blavatsky made as well as Annie Besant in the work they did to provide an alternative spiritual philosophy in the world of esoteric occultism. The work of these groups, like the Theosophical Society and the Anthroposophy education, like Steiner, were tremendous in helping steer the culture away from Christianity as the sole religion in America, and they helped shape much of our modern society by being myth makers. Myth makers are important for culture because they continue to pass down the core of myth that has been carried on for millennia. They truly carry the torch, and for that we owe them our gratitude. Blessed are the myth makers, for they hath concealed the mysteries behind holy doors of Swiss cheese. The Middle East provides lots of myth and fairy tales about cow and bull-born mushrooms, but Europe is the source for much of what we consider the pine amanita lore. Like, for instance, the Norse gods, such as Thor, who hold similar spears or swords as the South American idols and also have bull horns at the same time. All sorts of tales that relate to snow and reindeer come from these parts of the world, tales like Santa Claus, for instance. The concept of Santa Claus comes from several sources. In Slavic mythology, Perun is a thunder and lightning deity. The axe of Perun is kind of like a hammer, similar to the Thor's hammer, a relic of the ancient world that people still collect today. We went over how thunder and lightning were believed to cause the growth of mushrooms, the relationship between the oak tree and Hercules bat hitting the ground to cause thunder, the oak being a conifer is where the amanitas grow. Perun is an eagle that lives in a tree, and his arch nemesis is a serpent or dragon that lives at the base named Velis. This is pretty much the same as the Sumerian stories of the bird and serpent pitted in a constant war against each other. In Norse mythology, as told in the Edda, Midgard is the central theme, and the land of the giants where all creation is made from Ymir the giant. The world tree, called Yggdrasil, represents the Garden of Eden. At the base is a serpent called Jormungandr. Briefly, the Norse creation story begins of Ymir's flesh. The earth was fashioned, and of his sweat the sea, crags of his bones, trees of his hair, and his skull the sky. Then of his brows the blithe god made Midgard for sons of men, and of his brain the bitter-mooded clouds were all created. This is very similar to the Hindu story of Manu, the first man, and the Mexican creation stories of Quetzalcoatl. In fact, it's pretty much the same as all creation stories around the world. The giant Narfi had sons and daughters named Night and Day. All-Father peopled the world of Asgard, and at one point took Night and her son Day, and gave them 2 horses and 2 chariots, and sent them into the heavens to ride round about the earth. Night rides before with a horse named Frosty Mane, and each morning he bedews the earth with the foam from his bit. Notice the word bedews, hinting at mushrooms. This is part of the origin of the Santa Claus story. These horses are the reindeer, and they pass over the Rainbow Bridge to get to Asgard, the land of the giants, the North Pole. There are elves at the North Pole, remember? Little people living among giants. The Amanita muscaria mushroom is unique in that it causes the shaman or adventurer to experience something called macropsia or micropsia, where objects appear much larger or smaller than they really are. A twig on the ground could appear as a log, blocking the road in front of you. A tall tree could appear to be much smaller than it really is. This is where the core of fairy tale myth comes from, and when we read about giants and dwarves. Not some long-lost race of humans that the Smithsonian is covering up. That's fiction and myth. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Tiny Tim, Jack and the Beanstalk. Are you starting to wake up yet? That's why the Bible has giants in it, because the Bible is the greatest psychedelic fairy tale ever told. Getting back to Asgard. Next, we learn about what sounds exactly like the Greek creation story of mankind growing up from the fungus in the ground. Next, after this, the gods enthroned themselves in their seats and held judgment and called to mind, whence the dwarves had quickened in the mold and underneath in the earth, even as do maggots in flesh. The dwarves had first received shape and life in the flesh of Ymir and were then maggots, but by decree of the gods had become conscious with the intelligence of men and had human shape, and nevertheless they dwell in the earth and in stones. Lastly, we learn about Mimir's well. This part is key. But under the root which turns toward the rime giants is Mimir's well, wherein wisdom and understanding are stored, and he is called Mimir, who keeps the well. He is full of ancient lore, since he drinks of the well from the Galarhorn. Thither came Allfather and craved one drink of the well, but he got it not until he had laid his eye in pledge. So says Volupsa, all know I Odin, where the eye thou hidden, in the wide-renowned well of Mimir. The single eye, the wisdom, and the well all have special meaning in mushroom mythology, as we've seen. The Amanita muscaria only grows under conifers, so the presents only appear under trees like pine trees, which is why we bring one in the house every winter and put gifts under it for our friends and family. But you can't just eat them freshly picked. They are a meal in Siberia. Lots of people eat them fresh, but that's because you won't get high unless you dry them first. So to dry them, you need a slow dry, like a warmth from a fireplace maybe. Why not put them in some stockings then above the fireplace to dry? Siberia is famous for their reindeer, and reindeer love to eat the Amanita muscaria. It's probably their favorite food. One would imagine maybe they get high too. Do reindeer fly? Maybe. Do you ever see reindeer in the sky on the eve of December 24th? Europe is also famous for interesting entrances to some of their castles, palaces, and even some inns. The mushroom symbolism is undeniable, but at the same time, it goes mostly unrecognized as that because the mind hasn't been directed to that perspective. Who built all these wonderful places where we see all this elaborate mushroom design? Many castles and palaces of Europe were built by the Knights Templar, the keeper of the mushroom flame. They were soldiers for Christ early on and carried the red shield. This was the original incarnation of the King of Jerusalem. They were protector families that were eliminated by the Catholic Church, along with the Albigensians and the Cathars. These families had to go underground to escape the wrath of the Church. Eventually, we see these families spring up again in the societies of the Rosicrucians under Queen Elizabeth around 1600. These societies spread the gospel of the mushroom, but still under some guise of secrecy due to the power at the time that the Church still had. The Church had then created the Jesuits in 1540, founded by Ignatius of Loyola, nicknamed God's Marines. They've been responsible for many of the assassinations of leaders of society worldwide ever since their inception. The marriage of Elizabeth to Frederick V took place in 1613, and the first Rosicrucian publications appeared the following year. It was also called the Militia Evangelica, similar to the Soldiers of Christ of the earlier Templars. These publications led to what we now call the Age of Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. Thomas Paine wrote The Age of Reason. A quote from Paine, "Belief in cruel God makes a cruel man." Paine also stated, "In deism, our reason and our belief are happily united." Lastly, Paine also said, "He that rebels against reason is a real rebel, but he that in defense of reason rebels against tyranny has a better title to defender of the faith than King George III." Thomas Paine was a founding father and a Mason. The founding fathers were all Freemasons who were descended in philosophy from the Rosicrucians. They were deists who believed in God but not the dogmatic doctrines of the Church. They founded the country's constitution to safeguard the people against the tyranny of the monarchy, but also, more importantly, the tyranny of the Catholic Church. They gave us freedom from religion, but also freedom of religion, which means we would have the right to use magic mushrooms, cannabis, and herbal sacraments for our spirituality and religious purposes. Don't believe me? See for yourself. The Phrygian cap of liberty, worn by the revolutionaries. The Liberty Pole. The Statue of Liberty holding the torch of enlightenment. Thomas Jefferson was quoted as saying, "I have examined all the known superstitions of the world, and I do not find in our particular superstition of Christianity one redeeming feature. They are all alike, founded on fables and mythology. Also, Christianity neither is nor ever was part of the common law. And lastly, man, once surrendering his reason, has no remaining guard against absurdities the most monstrous, and like a ship without rudder is the sport of every wind. With such persons, gullibility, which they call faith, takes the helm from the hand of reason, and the mind becomes a wreck." John Adams was quoted as saying, "The United States is not a Christian nation any more than it is a Jewish or a Mohammedan nation." In the episode dealing with India, I first introduced the idea that UFOs were being prayed to by the seers and visionaries in the Rig Veda to bring mushrooms, the Soma, for the worshippers to consume as the sacrifice feast. In all the previous episodes, we discovered how all the gods and goddesses of the ancient world are personifications of the four elements, air, fire, earth, and water, and at their core, they all represent the magic mushroom, which requires all four elements to come into creation. The fire, in case you're wondering, is the lightning and thunder, believed by the ancient people to engender the mushroom growth. We know the earth is involved, and the water as well, and the spores need wind to travel to their newborn locations. The Maruts, I theorize, are wind messengers for the spores, and the Asvins are the UFOs that deliver the mushrooms. Some UFO researchers talk of Vimana, but that's not a reliable avenue of research in my opinion. This idea can be backed up by actual evidence. Before we get to that, let's look at some of the Rig Veda verses that led me to this conclusion. In these first verses, we hear of Asvins described as luminous aerial vehicles. My own words, let's see how they match up. A car which assumes many shapes goes to where Soma is pressed. Asvins, your Soma sheds delicious sweetness. Drink ye thereof, and come upon your dwelling. Your car, assuming many a shape, most often goes to the Soma presser's place of meeting. Dweller in floods, king, foremost, he displays his might, set among living things as measurer of days. Distilling oil he flows, fair, billowy, golden-hued, borne on a car of light, sharing one home with wealth. The Asvins come from heaven, come from mountains, and come from waters. These are all known characteristics of UFOs. Yea, come at milking time, at early morning, at noon of day, and when the sun is setting, by day, by night, with favor most auspicious. Not only now the drought hath drawn the Asvins, for this place, Asvins, was of old your dwelling. These were your houses. This is your habitation. Come to us from high heaven and from the mountain. Come from the waters bringing food and vigor. May we obtain the Asvins' newest favor and gain their health-bestowing happy guidance. Bring riches hither unto us, and heroes, and all felicity and joy, immortals. And men who have trimmed the sacred grass, bringing oblations and prepared, O Asvins, are invoking you. Ascend your car with golden seat, O Asvins, and with reins of gold that reaches even to the sky. Golden is its supporting shaft, and the axle also is of gold, and both the wheels are made of gold. Well, this sounds a lot like the vision of Ezekiel, doesn't it? Now, are we talking about UFOs and cows at the same time, too? When yellow stalks give forth the juice as cows from udders pour their milk, and voices sound the song of praise, Asvins worshippers show first. And we know they're talking about the Amanita muscaria. When purified within the jars, Soma, bright red and golden-hued, hath clothed him with a robe of milk. We call the universal gods and Maruts to the Soma drought, for passing strong are Prisni's sons. Fierce come the Marut's thundering voice, like that of conquerors. When ye go forward to victory, O men, born of the laughing lightning, may the Maruts guide us everywhere. May they be gracious unto us. Like some lost animal, drive to us bright Pusan, him who bears up heaven, resting on many-colored grass. Amrit is in the waters, and the waters there is healing balm. Be swift, ye gods, to give them praise. Within the waters, Soma thus hath told me, dwell all balms that heal, and Agni, he who blesseth all. The waters hold all medicines. O waters, teem with medicine to keep my body safe from harm, so that I long may see the sun. Whatever sin is found in me, whatever evil I have wrought, if I have lied or falsely sworn, waters remove it from me. I've presented the circumstantial evidence, now I'm going to give you the hard evidence. Official UFO Magazine, April 1976. 6 incidents were documented of strange lights seen the night before in the backyards or farm areas, and the next day when investigated, burned circles were found in the ground, and in those circles were growing giant mushrooms. In one case, they were growing in a burned circle in the desert where mushrooms were never known to grow before. We can clearly see here that all the elements are involved: wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. And now we know that these are elemental deities being prayed to. So what other evidence do I have? A book titled Discourses on the Secret Sciences by Abe N. Moutfalken de Villers, published in 1670. I'm going to just breeze through all the sylph material. Likewise, the sylphs are composed of the purest atoms of the air. He expedient of he bethought himself was to advise the sylphs to show themselves in the air to everyone. They did so sumptuously. These beings were seen in the air in human form, sometimes in battle array, marching in good order, halting under arms, or encamped beneath magnificent tents, sometimes on wonderfully constructed aerial ships whose flying squadrons roved at the will of the Zephyr. The sylphs seen the populace, the pedants, and even the crowned heads thus alarmed against them, determined to dissipate the bad opinion people had of their innocent fleet by carrying off men from every locality and showing them their beautiful women, their republic, and their manners of government, and then setting them down again on earth in diverse parts of the world. One day, among other instances, it chanced at Lyon that 3 men and a woman were seen descending from these aerial ships. Elementals are not from outer space, like aliens, and the UFO is not inhabited or operated. It's a living biological organism that belongs to the Earth, like the insects and animals. In 1955, the U.S. Air Force announced that UFOs were biological animals that lived in the atmosphere and they posed no harm to us. They seem to exist in the subatomic realm, unseen to the naked eye and permeous in the atmosphere. They can be filmed with infrared cameras, though. The question is now, do they abduct people, and if so, for what reason? It's possible, yes, they abduct people, since they appear to abduct cows, but we don't see people mutilations, only cattle. There's definitely a relationship between cows, the UFO, and mushrooms. We know that. More than that is speculation, unless you want to believe the people who claim they've been abducted. I choose not to for one important reason. The experience seems to be subjective. Jacques Vallée reports cases of all kinds. People have seen men, not aliens, making repairs to ships in the middle of a highway on a dark desert night, creatures with bodies full of hair, weapon technology using blue rays, UFO occupants wearing divers suits, creatures with scaly bodies or only one eye, one that was a frog man, another that had a watermelon for a head, and small dwarfs. Hallucinations can happen just like a dream. If you've ever had a group hallucination on LSD like I have, you would know that for a fact. I had one on Goonie Bird as a teenager, and all night 3 of us had group hallucinations where we all saw and experienced the exact same thing, but soon after realized it could not have been real. You would swear upon waking the dream was real, and you were there and it really happened. DMT is likely what causes us to dream, because the exact same thing happens on DMT as my hallucination that night, and how a real dream seems to be. All 3 of these are related, I believe. It's known by researchers that in the 1200s and in the 1600s, if I recall correctly, large wooden boats were seen floating in the sky and anchors were dropped down and men came down from the anchors, and each time there were plenty of witnesses. Why boats and not spaceships? I came up with a theory I coined the unified fungal theory after a meditation on this subject. I awoke at 3 in the morning to a vision of how it all fits together. Imagine this briefly and see if it resonates with you. The UFO is the higher mind of the mushroom, and the mushroom is the physical incarnation of the UFO. The UFO is telepathic. When someone is curious, they might appear, perhaps to test the curiosity. If the person responds positively by following the light, they become entranced. The UFO uses the electromagnetic frequencies to trip the DMT in the brain and then starts to reflect back images that it draws from the imagination set in that person's cultural ideas in order to communicate with the individual. At that point, the person might actually believe they are seeing an alien or talking to one. So I believe the experience is subjective vision, that's all, not a real alien encounter of any kind. This could also explain people who have visions of angels or even Jesus. What are we seeing then in some of these UFO videos, and how do we know which ones are real? The amorphous videos are usually real. Orbs and rods are real too, and sometimes referred to as fairies. Some UFOs are shaped like long tubes and have been seen entering volcanoes. The hard disk flying saucers are man-made since the 1940s, when the Nazis started building them and imported them into the US with the CIA during Operation Paperclip. Most of the videos you see on YouTube are CGI computer generated. Here are a couple real ones.
Yes, yes. Oh, I see it. It's right here. Well, we have is a
Freemasonry is split into many factions. Take it from someone who studied this for 30 years. It's not wise to lump all groups into one giant conspiracy, even the Freemasons. There's continental American Freemasonry and European Freemasonry. Most of continental has been taken over by European at this point. There's speculative, which is more philosophical, and operative, which is more political. It was British intelligence that falls under the Grandmother Lodge, English Freemasonry, that started the CIA, imported 1,600 Nazi scientists into the U.S. during Operation Paperclip from 1945 to 1959, and this led to MK Ultra in 1953. And don't forget, the Vatican worked with the Nazis during World War II as well. MK Ultra involved LSD, everyone knows, but not for the social control purposes most people think. It was not to breed anti-establishment hippies. That was the backfire of their operations. The real social control was to use Satanism and especially the UFO observations and speculations to make people believe aliens were visiting the Earth and interacting with humans. In 1959, Andrija Puharich published The Sacred Mushroom, Key to the Door of Eternity. I believe Andrija Puharich is the key to understanding MK Ultra's ultimate goals. He was the mind control master behind the scenes. 10 years before Wasson published Soma, Puharich was talking about Siberian mushroom cults. From 1953 to 1955, he served as a captain in the Army Medical Corps, Army Chemical Center, Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, exactly when MK Ultra started and where the projects took place. In August 1954, he received a security clearance and started working on military programs involving ESP, trance states, and mind-altering drugs. One of his subjects, named Harry, under trance, supposedly began channeling Tehuti, the Egyptian god of wisdom, where it was revealed that the mushroom was the tree of life and plant of immortality. Aldous Huxley was present at one of these channelings. On February 12, 1955, Puharich and Gordon Wasson were introduced. Wasson shared his knowledge of Mexican mushroom cults with Puharich. It was Puharich who first brought Uri Geller to America to introduce him to the UFO crowds. Puharich met Uri in Israel in 1971. Geller worked with Israel intelligence, which falls under British intelligence. Puharich arranged to have him studied in the U.S. by Captain Edgar Mitchell, the former astronaut, working with Russell Targ, Hal Puthoff, and Wilbur Franklin, who helped carry out experiments at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, which started the following year. In the preface of the book Uri, published in 1974, Puharich writes, "I had suspected for a long time from my researches that man has been in communication with beings not of this earth for thousands of years. This personal opinion comes from a close reading of the record of ancient religions and from my own observations and data. What is not clear is why this communication has been kept secret for so long." Then we learn that Puharich met with Charles Laffhead, who formed the Seekers, also called the Brotherhood of the Seven Rays, a UFO religious group that formed in 1953, the same year, coincidentally, George Adamski started his UFO group. Adamski founded the Royal Order of Tibet while living in Laguna Beach in the 1930s, saw his first UFO in 1946, gave his first lecture in 1949. Adamski's first encounter with a friendly Nordic-looking Venusian called Orthon in 1952 occurred around the same time as George Van Tassel's initial contact. In 1953, Adamski published his book The Flying Saucers Have Landed, which recalled his Nordic contact. That same year, George Van Tassel started a group in Joshua Tree, California at Giant Rock and published a newsletter called Interplanetary News. Van Tassel worked with Douglas Aircraft, then Howard Hughes, then Skunk Works. The psychedelic culture didn't start with the Beatles or the acid tests. Giant Rock was ground zero, not the music scene in the 60s, and Giant Rock was infiltrated with intelligence spies and Nazis working their dark magic on the UFO hippie groups. This is where UFO cults and religions started. The main link is William Dudley Pelley, a writer, spiritualist, and fascist political activist who founded the Silver Legion. He got into UFOs in prison, called them Soulcraft, and published a book of automatic writings called Starguests and a magazine called Valor. He was a close associate of George Hunt Williamson, who was a close associate of George Adamski. Adamski claims to have photographed this UFO in 1952. It's suspected by some researchers that some of the early members of the original Ascended Master teachings of the I Am group were recruited from the ranks of Pelley's organization, the Silver Legion. If you think about it, it's highly suspicious that this is the origin of the Nordic blonde alien stories, which were later picked up by people like David Icke and spread through his reptilian lore. It's inherently racist and used for division. We don't know a lot about it, but we do know the government has been developing flying saucers that mimic UFOs since at least the 1940s. These are suspected to be German in origin and likely brought here under Operation Paperclip. They're remarkably different from UFOs. They do not morph, despite the propaganda you might hear. They are flying saucers, not UFOs. The gunships on the top and bottom come from German tanks. We should keep in mind as well that the European secret societies have known about SILF since at least the days of the Kabbalists and the book Secret Sciences in the 1600s. The design of the flying saucers' intent was to mimic the UFO and use that for mind control. In a letter to Walter Bauert, author of Operation Mind Control, Julianne McKinney, director of the Electronic Surveillance Project of the Association of National Security Alumni, writes, "Having been given no reason to believe otherwise, I have personally concluded that so-called UFO abductions and the events surrounding those abductions and sightings are a black intelligence operation involving government-sponsored kidnappings, experimental drugs, surgical experimentation, sophisticated electronics and directed energy technologies, implantable microcircuit devices, experimental aircraft, Hollywood-style special effects, and the exploitation of so-called abductees as sources of ova, sperm, and aborted fetuses for use in government-sponsored genetic experiments. In sum," McKinney continued, "I see these UFO activities as being nothing more than a massive covert intelligence fraud being perpetrated upon the gullible public, a lucrative, large-scale mind control operation qualifying as an attempt at creating the cult to end all cults, the cult from outer space." McKinney says another source told her that there was a project headed by Michael Aquino that involves the programming of so-called UFO abductees. The source told her that this project is codenamed Green Star and is a mind control operation involving an overlapping of satanic cults, the U.S. military, and the UFO community. In court testimony, Paul Bonacci, a Monarch mind control victim, was asked why the CIA Project Monarch wanted children with split personalities. Bonacci, because if one was captured in the future spying, the personality of the person captured would go into the personality who would have no useful information. There would be other personalities that would come out and would render the person to seem hallucinatory or to seem as if he was indeed crazy. In fact, their program was named Star Wars, was in fact a program in which we were taken aboard so-called alien spacecraft which were in tunnels in Colorado, which were not real spaceships nor were they real aliens. We were simply induced with drugs so that we would not render reality to anything that we would see, and later on, if we ever related this information, it would come out and appear as if we were crazy. In 1957, Ewan Cameron received a grant from the CIA to study the effects of sensory deprivation. A 2012 lawsuit filed by veterans groups against the CIA and DoD refers to Ewan Cameron's methods. The suit also states that two researchers, Dr. Lewis West and Dr. Jose Delgado, working together under the early CIA MKUltra Subproject 95, utilized two protocols, brain implants and Rick Edom, remote radio brain control, to program the minds of victims. On the Constantine Report, a website by Alex Constantine, in an article titled Fascists in White Coats, the CIA's Dr. Lewis West and the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute, Constantine writes, in 1972, Dr. Lewis West, a ranking CIA psychiatrist, also a director of the Conservative American Family Foundation and a False Memory Syndrome Foundation, an organization founded by pedophile apologists that marginalizes victims of ritual abuse and libels their advocates, with an obsessive interest in mind control, proposed experimenting on the brains of blacks and Latino prisoners, women and children at a secret psychiatric unit near the UCLA. This is the same Dr. Lewis West who had contact with Charles Manson while working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. What was happening is that the CIA was monitoring UFO cult followers at Giant Rock and abducting them, implanting them, and this is what led to a wave of channeled communications with the Space Brothers in the 1950s until now, like Urantia, Ashtar, Bashar, Seth, and Ramtha. The main figures involved in the so-called UFO and alien disclosure today are some of the most untrustworthy people in science and government. The Disclosure Project is meant to steer your attention away from the reality of sylphs and the true nature of UFOs and steer it towards the idea of negative and positive aliens, linking it to a government cover-up. This is the purpose of almost all these personalities involved in the field of ufology. They're all employed in some manner by the intelligence agencies to pump this stuff out. In some cases, the personality sells lots of books that fund their mythological narratives, such as Zachariah Sitchin, the ultimate king mythmaker, and his Anunnaki bullshit. And then there's David Icke with his reptilian bullshit, which we'll jump into right in the next presentation, so stay tuned. We saw a barrage of alien and science fiction films come from Hollywood starting in 1950 with Rocket Ship XM, followed by The Day the Earth Stood Still and then The War of the Worlds in 1953. Godzilla, Reptilian King of the Monsters in 1954. No less than 100 science fiction films came out in the 1950s, many revolving around extraterrestrials and space visitations. There were sci-fi films about spores taking over the planet, threats of nuclear holocaust on Earth, and Martian invaders in all varieties. The Outer Limits even had an episode titled Special Delivery, where the boys in the neighborhood all started growing mushrooms and then disappearing. The theme that seemed to be the most powerful are lizard people. Many of us have seen the Star Trek episode, The Land of the Lost, the miniseries V, Jupiter Rising, etc. Spider-Man's arch nemesis is a lizard man. Comic books for decades have featured reptilian gods and lizard people. If the reptilians are here and hiding from us, they aren't doing a very good job. All reptilian information that involves any details comes from David Icke's book, The Children of the Matrix, which has zero sources other than fantasy books and fairy tales, and his interview with Credo Mutwa, the shaman. The only shaman I've ever heard of whose initiation ceremony didn't involve drugs, but instead the consumption of a gray alien body. Here are some of the quotes from the 6-hour interview. Muero challenged the great chief of the serpent people to a fight, and he cut off the penis of the royal king of the snake people, and that caused a big war. This is the same story as the castration of Shiva in the forest, Osiris from Egypt, and Attis from Phrygia. Next. But a royal Chitauri has got 3 eyes, sir. It's got the yellowish eyes, which glow in an almost ice-like way like jewels, like certain types of yellow jewels, and then they have got an eye in the center of their forehead. Now this eye of the Chitauri is the eye that kills, because it can knock a man down just by the fire that comes out of it. This is the myth of the centaur and the cyclops, the Greek Polyphemus, and there's a fairy tale from Ireland dealing with the battle Lug and Belor of the piercing eye met in the battle. The latter had a destructive eye which was never opened except on the battlefield. Credo also claims he was abducted by aliens. It was there that I also went missing for 4 days in 1959 in one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. My teacher, Elizabeth Moyo, had sent me to get a special herb which only grows on the foothills of those mountains, and as I was looking for this herb when all of a sudden a bright blue mist fell all around me. Lastly, he describes his experience being initiated by eating a gray alien corpse. We went down the hole. We used a broken ladder. There inside the hole we ate small pieces of something. He told me to chew these things as they were quite hard. He said, look, what we shared is something that can only be eaten while you're hiding in a hole. And that thing is the flesh of a god. I said, God? He said, yes. I said, but I am sick now. He said, wait, you'll recover. Mr. Icke, I can't describe to you what happened next. Suddenly you get stark raving, laughing mad. We started laughing. Ha ha ha. It was utterly incredible. What had caused the laughter we do not know, but we laughed for hours, all 3 of us. When I drank the water, my sense of taste was so heightened that I was utterly shaken. Ordinary water from a mountain spring tasted like, I don't know, like what? Like wine, like something out of I don't know where. And then another feeling fell over all of us, as if we were one with the entire universe. When I looked at a tree outside my friend's homestead, it was as if the tree was a multicolored living rainbow. When I looked at the mountains far away, my sense of sight was so intense I could see colors beyond colors. And then, sir, I was very weak, but with a monstrous appetite. I left my friend's homestead and returned to South Africa. Every step of the way, I seemed like a person reborn. And that, my friends, is a psychedelic experience, exactly. Not what happens when you eat the body of an alien, but instead the mushroom, the flesh of the gods. And lastly, I want to address a psyop called Adrenochrome. This is a Hollywood ploy to discredit legitimate pedophilia research and exposure. It's meant to make it appear that anyone who talks about elites and pedophilia can be dismissed as a crackpot Christian lunatic. The idea is that the elites torture children as part of a sacrifice some claim is done to worship the reptilians that need blood sacrifice to shapeshift and take human form. That's one story. The other is that the elites use it to stay youthful or gain immortality. We've already been over the fact that the quest for immortality is a mushroom-centered myth tracing back to Gilgamesh. Now, the drug is real, but nobody takes it for hallucinating or immortality. It was developed for schizophrenia but never took off. If it was any good, it would have shown up on the Grateful Dead parking lot, and it never has. So it's supposed to be extracted during torture from the adrenal glands. But what does come from this area of the brain is DMT. In 1923, H.P. Lovecraft wrote 2 short stories, one about DMT called From Beyond, about a scientist who invented a headset that allowed you to see into other dimensions, and one about a lizard race of people called A Nameless City. These 2 stories were picked up by Hunter Thompson and used in Fear and Loathing. Then A Clockwork Orange backdrop and a few other locations Hollywood put it in subliminally to use it for mind control on gullible and ignorant Christians and conspiracy researchers. The newest conspiracy to hit the Christian scene is that DMT facilitates contact with interdimensional entities. This is the next wave of the MK Ultra alien narrative mind control to be pushed by the intelligence agencies. Don't fall for it is my advice. This is just an extension of the superstition demon beliefs. They're being baited by intel agencies, and now, so are many of the liberal psychedelic users as well, all sucked into the latest New Age religion of alien gods, the latest development in MK Ultra's mind control project. Isn't it odd and a little suspicious how all these conspiracies like Flat Earth, Ancient Aliens, and Giants are all dominated by superstitious Christians? Like I said, I've been at this for 30 years. There was a time when neither of these conspiracies existed. Nobody ever talked about Adrenochrome until about 8 years ago. Nobody really started talking about DMT and interdimensional alien beings and military rituals to bring about sacrifices and torture of children until Alex Jones explained it to Joe Rogan on his show about 5 or 6 years ago.
Everyone who's done a high dose of psychedelic drugs has had this experience. So everyone who's listening to you right now who's done DMT or done 5 grams of psilocybin, they know that this is you have some kind of communication with something else. The question is that something else inside your psyche, or is that something else a chemical doorway? Question. Is there a chemical doorway inside the mind that opens up, and the belief is that when you die, and this is what the afterlife is, that when you die, your brain produces these chemicals. These chemicals open up this doorway, and this is the portal to the next dimension.
I have heard that I have talked to Army generals, commanding generals, major generals, generals, CIA, everybody, and they're all 100%. And I thought it was a psyop before, and then I've researched it. I've talked to hundreds of people now, not on air, but I'm going to make a film on this, who've taken ayahuasca and DMT. I've not taken it, and for obvious reasons, and it's unbelievable because, I mean, they 100% in San Francisco is the main project site, literally have an alien base, and they are literally communicating, and they've got like astronaut level people taking super hardcore levels of drugs and going into meetings with these things and making intergalactic deals. And again, that's what the government believes and says they're doing. And
when you say the government, that's a broad stroke. You're painting you're using a broad brush. Like, what do you mean by the government?
Breakaway rogue intelligence agencies.
Okay, so what you're saying is essentially that they're using psychedelic drugs to communicate with interdimensional beings. All right.
Now we hear about this all the time. Rick Strassman wrote a book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, in 2001. In that book, he introduced the idea of interdimensional entities being seen on DMT by documenting the experiences of some of his subjects who described things like this. However, most people do not, including myself, and there seems to be an agenda here. There's no time or ability to interpret communication. It's purely subjective and happening in the mind. Nick Sand, a psychedelic chemist who first introduced the idea of smoking DMT, openly criticized Strassman for his sloppiness, saying that basically, you get somebody being examined by doctors in white suits and you're out of your body. It's no wonder you think you are on an alien examining table. Strassman got his research grant from the Scottish Rite Masons, as admitted in his book. Another author is currently facilitating experiments on DMT to see if interdimensional entities can be contacted and communicated with at Imperial College, which is a wholly controlled Freemason college. Whether this person knows it or not, he's a product of the MK Ultra Freemason New Age religion mind control program. All of this really boils down to one question. Do you believe there are forces outside ourselves that influence us, or do you believe that we are all spirits and aspects of ourselves which are not contained in our bodies are mainly responsible for guiding our destinies? And this really boils down to one thing. Do you believe that power is outside yourself and your destiny is beyond your control, or do you believe you are the master or mistress of your own destiny and that we create our own reality? And that's really what my book Ancient Psychedelia is all about getting to the bottom of. Personally, I choose the latter. In this final presentation, I just wanted to sum up a few things that we went over from a personal perspective and also share some really important information with you about how we can all help heal our planet and ourselves in the process. This is all about working with God or Goddess instead of against them, which is in reality working against ourselves. A really interesting and important book I recommend at least taking a look at, and the fellow's website. His name is David Moore. He wrote a book titled Fungal Biology and the Emergence of Life. David is a biological scientist, and his book is not an easy read, but his website provides for some fascinating tidbits of knowledge on the mushroom. The site can be found at davidmoore.org.uk. David provides a theory backed up by scientific evidence that all life on Earth evolved from the fungus. We've heard stories that in the beginning everything was bigger and there were giant mushrooms all over the Earth. It was cold and the climate suited them perfectly. If his theory is correct, and my theory is as well, relating to the UFOs being one with the mushroom and the Earth, then the Earth is indeed alive and we are not the masters of this domain. We are guests and stewards, and when the host gets tired of the guests and stewards abusing his property, he gets right to it and cleans house. So if we don't stop destroying this planet, the planet will surely destroy us. Right out of high school, I became an environmental activist working for Greenpeace in 1989, mostly because I really cared about the rainforests. I had quit working for Greenpeace in 1991 after reading an article called Who Owns the Environmentalist Movement, and I learned all about Agenda 21 and the globalist plans to use hippies and the environmentalist movement for corporate and global control. We see that playing out now with Anil Schwab and the World Economic Forum. We don't need corporate solutions, clean air standards, or taxes on pollution. What we need is some sanity added to the solution. Not some bullshit Green New Deal. In 1991, I went to work volunteering with Jack Herod to help legalize hemp because of all the great things it could do for the planet. But that went sour when Jack passed away, God rest his soul, and Prop 64 passed. Since that time, I always thought hemp was the best environmental solution, but it turns out it's only 1/10 or even 1/100th of the ability of the mushroom to save this planet. That's where the next author comes in, who I want to introduce to some of you new folks. His name is Paul Stamets. His book, Mycelium Running, should be in every household in this country and even the world. Everyone should read this book. Paul is someone making a real positive change in the world. This is one of my favorite quotes by Stamets. Mycelium steers the course of ecosystems by favoring successions of species. Ultimately, mycelium prepares its immediate environment for its benefit by growing ecosystems that fuel its food chain. I see a mycelium as the living network that manifests the natural intelligence imagined by Gaia theorists. The mycelium is an exposed sentient membrane, aware and responsive to changes in its environment. Paul then goes on to explain the similarity of the neural networks in the brain and the shape and makeup of mycelium networks as compared to the internet, all of which have a distinct neural network array shape. In the same way the internet is becoming like a global hive mind, the mycelium network shares information among all forms of plant life throughout the planet, and in the same way our DNA strands can hold millions of times more information than the biggest supercomputers, the Earth's mycelium internet can share much more information than we currently are aware of. Stamets even suggests that whole galaxies are made up of mycelium-like matrices. Stamets' plan for the myco-restoration includes 4 primary steps: myco-filtration, myco-forestry, myco-remediation, and myco-pesticides. Myco-reforestation involves taking mushrooms such as turkey tail and using them to prevent forest blights, as well as breaking down toxic chemicals like PCBs and dioxins in the environment. Species of fungus that have been identified which can clean up deadly neurotoxins such as VX and sarin. These toxic substances which would kill humans become food and nutrient sources for cultures of mycelium. Nature has been using myco-restoration since the beginning of time, and all that we as humans must do is learn how to reproduce it and help the earth along. One of our greatest toxic contaminants found from the petroleum industry and all the petrochemical byproducts we use in society. We can use mushrooms to remove these toxins from our environment and make the earth a lot cleaner and safer by applying these methods. According to Stamets, since many of the bonds that hold plant material together are similar to the bonds found in petroleum products, including diesel, oil, and many herbicides and pesticides, mycelial enzymes are well suited for decomposing a wide spectrum of durable toxic chemicals. Oyster mushrooms grown on toxified diesel oil soil showed no traces of detectable petroleum residues, which means if the test showed no traces of heavy metals also, the mushrooms would be edible at this point. In closing, I thought it would be good to show some of the strangest geological locations on this planet, intermixed with some really good UFO footage, while I explain a little bit about my Earth consciousness theories and ideas. When I look at these images of mushroom rocks, for a minute I think, well, those are natural Earth formations, but when I review them all together in context and also take into consideration the impossibility of these being natural formations, my mind starts to wonder how these rocks got this way in the first place. When I first became conscious of the idea that the UFOs bring the mushrooms and use electromagnetism to trip the DMT in our brains, and I learned about the work of David Moore and the biological origins of life, these pictures started to take on a whole new meaning to me. I see the UFO and mushroom as terraforming the entire planet electromagnetically. I see them shaping the Earth as they fly along, modeling it and the designs of nature after consciousness itself. It seems not only improbable, but impossible to me that the 4,000 species of snakes in the world, or the 6,500 species of mammals, or the 10,000 species of birds, or 30,000 species of fish on this planet somehow all evolved over time. I suspect that the UFO mushroom designed everything by creating a clock system of radiation, well-timed with the horoscope of the zodiac, for the planet to undergo, for massive influxes of astral data to be pumped into the planetary system and make its way down to physical bodies and human consciousness.
Is it a craft burning off fuel as it ascends into space?
I also
Whatever this thing is,
that
it's
we
not
live in a
making any noise,
self-contained
and it's
system,
not clear
and that
how
outer
it stays
space might
along.
be some sort of myth. I know that we can see outer space.
Oh, here's another one right here.
Cannot be verified. I'm certain
You see
the
'em?
aliens are a myth at this point.
Flying right over our
We live on a
heads.
flat Earth. That's a psyop. But I don't believe the Earth is spinning at 6,000
Pointing it
miles
right
an
at
hour
'em.
while it's turning on its
And now he's
axis at
turning.
1,100 miles an hour either.
Ooh,
Yeah.
If that were
Yeah, you
true,
see 'em?
the alignment of the stars would not be practically the same night after night. That's just common sense. I do find the videos of Elon Musk's rockets trying to penetrate the icy firmament to be very interesting, along with the fact that Werner von Braun, who headed the Nazi-led scientists who came to America to help the U.S. build rocket ships and flying saucers, is buried with a grave marker that quotes Psalms 19:1, wherein it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." I also find it incredibly interesting that the Jesuits invented much of modern scientism, starting with the planets and stars, when the Jesuit Society were the ones who published the first books based on Copernicus and his new theory, who first declared the Earth revolves around the Sun, and Galileo, who advocated the same thing but also invented the telescope. Having investigated this, I find it ludicrous, or the idea that the Sun is 93 million miles away. The cherry on this cake is that the Jesuits secretly borrowed their system of science from the Medici family in Italy, who were known to be occultists and practitioners of the magic mushroom. These are some of the things I'm interested in now because they deal with how the Earth really works, and the history of patriarchal kingships of man have proven attempt after attempt to wipe history from the books and from our minds. If we do live in an enclosed system that was created by mushrooms and UFOs, and humans are nothing more than pinheads of those mushroom complexes which are spreading their mycelium throughout the universe, whatever that is, it certainly does give life a different kind of meaning. Currently, it's us humans that hold the highest level of physical intelligence, but if we are not careful, the Earth will protect itself and spawn off a whole new species, wiping out everything from the past once again, similar to the Great Flood. So let's all chip in and help the Earth heal, and in the process we'll heal ourselves as well. This concludes the presentation titled You Can't Unsee It, Episode 15, Planet Mushroom. For more information on the subject, visit AncientPsychedelia.com and check out the free online version of the book, Ancient Psychedelia, Alien Gods and Mushroom Goddesses. Thanks for watching. One last thing I should mention, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support me in my work, here are several ways you can do that. It does help tremendously, and I really appreciate it.